Jack, welcome back to the show. How you doing?
Thanks for having me. It's great to be back.
It's good to have you back, pal. For anybody that doesn't know, obviously you'll see it from the intro, but Jack was on previously. Had a really good conversation with him, and I think we're going to get into some interesting bits today. So,
sure. When was that? It's been a while.
Months. I was thinking to myself earlier, was it pre-pandemic or was it in the middle of it? I think it was just as we were getting into it.
Yeah, I think it was as well.
So it would have been around May last year or something.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about if you've felt this with the pandemic, but time feels so strange. It's like it feels like a long time ago that we spoke, but also that not a lot has actually gone on in that time. Like that time's actually gone really quickly. It's bizarre.
It's a really weird dichotomy of of how I think and feel about time now, because like you said, in one breath, the last 2 years have snapped by, but so much has happened.
Yeah.
And I've effectively lost all sense of it. So I can't recall anything. Like I had a conversation with Carol Vorderman last April, and it seems like it was like four years ago. I was like, it's just kind of a mind fuck, you know, but no, it's good to catch up. So I think first and foremost, tell me how Demographica is going, because you guys are active, you're building, you know, things are really coming together on your side. So give us an update on sort of what's been going on with you guys first.
It's been a crazy period, you know, and like looking at that, we often, so Brett and I, who are we're the co-directors, and we often just sort of sit and chat about kind of our progress, and we do sort of like strategy meetings and stuff, and look at ways in which we can fuck things up, which I think is important that a lot of companies don't do.
100%.
That kind of thing. And we always say how sort of mad it is the progress that we've made. You know, we've got just over 30 volunteers working with us in all different areas. We're producing web series for our YouTube channel. We've just gone through a massive rebrand, fully transitioned into being an independent media outlet. You know, for people that don't know, that's what we do. It's about not only giving young people a platform to be able to talk about politics and social issues across the political aisle, you know, breaking down that barrier to entry for people to get into journalism and talking about politics, but also to create conversations that break down those partisan barriers and bring people together and actually having conversations in a solution focused way, instead of getting people to butt heads and just doing things for clicks. You know, that's kind of what we're about. So I
think that's one of the things that really attracted me to the conversation that we had initially, was when you kind of profiled out what you were all about and what you were trying to build. It was, you know, let's forget about colors. Let's just have the conversation that leads us towards a solution around the problems that we're facing, which I thought, you know, not only was, you know, unique, especially in our time, but coming from someone who, you know, was, you know, and not being ageist or anything like that, but that's usually from somebody who's, you know, seasoned, who can see the experience of both sides and the detriment that does to political discourse and dialogue and conversation and nuance and context, and, you know, all the things that you expect from leaders and politicians and, you know, anybody in the, you know, influence space. And, you know, when you guys brought that to life, which is, you know, kind of the ethos around what Demographica is, it was really refreshing and gave me a lot of kind of positive feelings around it, because it was coming from someone young. And because it was focused on that dialogue from young people. I thought that was brilliant.
I really appreciate that, mate. Like, I think that's the thing that's always underpinned whatever we've done, and particularly, you know, the new shows on the new podcasts that we're producing. We're not just for young people. It just so happens that we're youth-led and young people are involved in the content that we're creating.
Absolutely.
Really, what we think it's a necessity, really, for the position that the country is in, that somebody, it doesn't really matter who it is, but somebody starts to have these conversations in this way, because the direction that we're going, and I'm sure we'll get into this, the direction that we're going towards, if we don't start having those conversations in a more productive way, is not a good place. And I think that for too long, the frustration that we had was that we switch on political programs and it would be this privately educated person versus this person who, you know, went to university or whatever, talking about these abstract, you know, stories or ideas without actually engaging with the people who are directly involved. And that's the thing that's always frustrated me, is why aren't we engaging, first of all, with each other in a more productive way, but also platforming people who are being directly impacted by stories. how often do you really see that? You know, that's something that I'm kind of trying to work on at the moment, is if we're doing a story on how the pandemic and lockdowns have impacted cancer waiting times, which is, they've decimated, you know, cancer care in the country, the pandemic has. Not many, it's not something that we're talking about on a really wide scale. I want to talk to somebody who has cancer that's been impacted by that. You know, that's how we're really going to learn about what the issue is. Someone that's going through
it's root cause, right? It's going to root cause. It's not this opinion. It's not this speculation. It's not this let me give you what works from my argument sake, you know, and take my viewpoint from an already biased point of view because I have some ulterior motive to get through, or some talking points to get read and spoken. And, you know, it's not about that. And I'm refreshed by your approach to it because it has that kind of neutral nature to it, you know, and I know you guys are, you know, you have your own political beliefs and all of that stuff, but that everybody does. But to approach it even with those beliefs in such a neutral fashion to get the solution kind of, you know, the solution focused conversations happening with those people who are impacted by the issues of the discussion is absolutely what we need to be, you know, putting up on a pedestal and shining more of a light on, because otherwise we're just cross aisle bickering.
Yeah, exactly. And it's our goal really just to kind of make that the norm. It's not, obviously we've got aspirations to grow and, you know, make lots of money and all of this stuff, you know, that's what we want to do. But also it's about pushing the mainstream media outlets to start having conversations in that way. You know, they've caused so many of the issues that we want to see, you know.
Do you think, I don't mean to cut you off, Jack. Do you think they're one, worth saving, and two, able to be saved?
I think they're able to be saved. I'm not so sure whether they're worth saving. You know, so the example that I always give is like Good Morning Britain. You know, the amount of conversations that are held on Good Morning Britain, maybe less so since Piers Morgan left. I haven't watched it too much since he's left, to be honest, which maybe says a lot about the kind of draw that he is. But I think that shows like that only do bad. I don't think too much good comes from Good Morning Britain and the conversations that they have and what that does for kind of discussions more nationally. Is that those shows are there to rile you up. They want to have, they want to choose an issue that's divisive. So like Insulate Britain, for example, and have somebody from Insulate Britain who has these perhaps good ideas in principle, but the tactics that they use are ridiculous. And then somebody that absolutely despises, maybe they're a climate denier, despises Insulate Britain. And they just want those people to fight because that's what gets clicks. And it's entertaining, right? You know, it gets our blood boiling and that's kind of what we look for, but it does no good. And these are the audio.
Exactly. It's the audio visual version of clickbait headlines.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And
that's what it is.
Yeah, what I guess, you know, it's a long process, but we want to kind of change the way that we have those conversations and do so in an entertaining and informative way, because, you know, it can be done. It's not the only way of entertaining people is by having these kinds of conversations. And also there's a major importance behind it. You know, I know we're going to get into COP and that kind of thing. Like, these are really important issues that need to be spoken about in a sensible way. And it's the responsibility of those who have power, you know, whether that be you own a media outlet or you run a newspaper or you're a leader, to not engage in that fashion and to engage in, you know, I hesitate to use the word adult, but a mature manner, right?
And I'll add one more thing to that. Short form content does not work when you're trying to have political discourse and when you're trying to have nuanced conversations about really nuanced subject matter. Really, you know, in order to have in-depth conversations, you need to have the time to let those conversations come to fruition, develop naturally. There has to be, you know, again, it can't be a shouting match, but 7-minute segments or 12-minute segments that are shouting, as you said, from one extreme point of view to the other extreme point of view, with some mediator in the middle who is fueling one side of that more than the other in most, you know, depending on what channel you're watching, is not helpful, because all you're doing is reinforcing the echo chambers and the things that we see, you know, in places like social media and, you know, other media outlets. You know, we know who watches Fox, we know who reads the Telegraph, we know who watches CNN, we know, you know what I mean? So people are being diluted into these very, very simplistic buckets. And that's why I asked the question about if they're even worth saving, because I think the whole setup of how our media is produced and distributed is nothing but unhelpful. And it thrives on being unhelpful because they're not trying to solve issues. They're trying to rile people up, as you said.
I agree. And, you know, I think we're still continuing to move away from the more traditional forms of media, and those media outlets, you know, take the biggest ones in this country will be forced to move away because people just won't watch them anymore. People just, my generation aren't going to stick on Good Morning Britain in the morning, you know, and watch
I mean, other than someone like yourself who is invested in the space, and it means something to be abreast and updated, you know, up to date on what everybody in the space is saying. Is anybody your age even watching them now? Because
no,
if I look at the demographic,
I don't watch a lot of those programs. Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
And it's interesting that you mentioned short form content as well, because this has been a real challenge for us when we look at the kind of our audience. You know, sort of 16 to 25 is our main target demographic, and then sort of 25 to 30. When we're thinking about the ways that we make content, we have to take into account that the majority of our audience are spending probably 60% when they're on social media, 60% of their time they're on Instagram or they're on TikTok. And so the challenge for us is how can we make content that still falls into our philosophy and our ethos, but is transferable to something like TikTok? And it's fucking difficult. It's really difficult. So the way that media is moving doesn't play into the kind of thing that we're trying to solve. So, you know, there's lots of different factors, and you're kind of fighting against this stuff all the time because people have such short attention spans, and that's just the way that the world is at the moment. So, you know, how can you kind of adapt? How can we adapt to that? It's difficult.
At least you have a team behind you.
Yeah, an amazing team.
Because I think, you know, I speak from sort of, you know, a sole creator perspective. And when I'm putting a show like this out, or if it's just me speaking to the camera for an hour and a half, then the production is on me. Yeah. The distribution is on me. The sound quality, all of that, all of those different kind of little nuanced issues, they're all residing in one person. And it makes it very difficult to then take an hour and a half show and start parsing it into, you know, 1 minute clips where you're trying, because again, that's not how I talk. That's not how I distribute my thoughts or anything like that. So I totally feel you. It's just, again, the benefit you have, I suppose, is you've got a great team behind you that can help assist in that distribution, and they're native to those platforms. I'm not native to TikTok, right? I know there's an audience out there for me, but I haven't engaged in even attempting to get to that audience yet. You know, my thing is like, get it up on YouTube and let's see if anybody can stand, you know, 90 minutes of a guy just ranting, you know. But, you know, at least you have that support system behind you that says, okay, we can do some other production. We can take advantage of these platforms. We know our audience is there. We know how to manifest ourselves into those platforms. I think, you know, you'll figure it out.
For sure, yeah, I think so too. And we're lucky to have not only, you know, people who have expertise in those platforms at a young age, but they're passionate about what we're trying to do as well. You know, when we're looking to bring people onto the team, something that we always look for, and a question that we always ask people is, you know, what are you passionate about? What do you care about? Why do you want, you know, to be working towards our goals? And to us, that's more important than whether you have expertise in Excel or whether how good you are on the Adobe suite. You know, like if you're passionate about what we're trying to do, and you can kind of transfer those ideas towards creating interesting and engaging content, that's the most important thing. And there's every young person I meet is passionate about something, whether they believe that they're political or not. There's something that ties into politics that they deeply care about, that's impacted them, and they want to get involved and want to be given the opportunity to be able to talk about that. And that's reassuring, you know.
Absolutely. I think, sorry, go ahead. We've got a little lag.
No. Yeah, I was going to say, it's just reassuring to know that when we're looking towards the future and solving those issues, that people, when engaged, want to, you know, get stuck in and have solutions and have ideas as to how to fix them. And the trick is speaking to those people and giving them the opportunity to be able to talk about issues, engage, talk about solutions. And that isn't done enough. It shouldn't just be youth-led organizations like ours that are engaging with those people. We need the more established institutions, the more established outlets to be doing that as well. Otherwise people fall off the radar, you know, as they get older, they get disillusioned with the system, and that's what creates these perpetual issues.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, as you said, if you ask somebody, they may not think of themselves as political, but they've definitely got an opinion that matters a lot to them about something. And in that, everyone is political to a degree. It's just about what you're political about. And everybody should have the opportunity to speak opinions and truth to power. And I think that's a really, really good thing, because especially from what you guys are doing from the youth side of things, is you're giving voices who are often told, well, what do you know? You're 16.
Yeah.
You know, I've been guilty of this, even when I talk about someone like Greta Thunberg, right? Like I'm guilty of saying, like, what the hell do you know, right? But mine's less about the number of years you've been on the earth, more about, you know, opinion versus qualifications around specific subject matters that you're talking about. I don't want to hear from somebody who has no experience in a certain field. Just, you know, the opinion is fine, but don't come at me as like an expert, and don't come at me as an authority. Come at me with an opinion. Your opinion always matters, but don't expect me to take it as science when you talk about something from a opinion-based point of view. There's delineation to be had there, I think.
Sure. Yeah, and that goes for everybody. You know, it goes. You know,
absolutely.
Take people at their point, at what they say, at the kind of quality of what they're trying to communicate. Yeah, that's you know, for sure the most important thing. I mean, I listened to your episode this morning while I was walking my dogs, and you know, talking about COP, and I wanted to hear your thoughts before I came on the show, and it was interesting. And I think you and Greta Thunberg agree far more than you think you and Greta Thunberg agree.
Well, I would say. One of the things when I was editing that episode back, one of the things, and it also goes to the point around the Insulate Britain nutbags that are gluing their faces to concrete. Yeah. It's like, obviously we have and I said this on the show when I covered it, right? Obviously we have a misalignment in terms of how we go about making change, sure. But I don't think the underlying issues that they're raising are wrong. And it's the same with Greta. I'm not a climate denier.
Yeah.
You know, but blah, blah, blah doesn't work.
I think it may be even the kind of deeper than that, because I think what she's saying there, you know, from what I interpret from it, is kind of the point that you were making. I think you probably made it in maybe a more eloquent way, but what I think she's trying to say is that we have these world leaders that come to this stage, that go to COP and talk about how important it is to fight the climate crisis, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. They're all chatting away. And really what we get from that is no results. We're not Correct. Getting like you said, to fight the climate crisis, whether you're a passionate kind of, you know, you're passionate about tackling the climate crisis or not. It's obvious to everybody that really globally, and probably, you know, in this country as well, there's no real concrete plan. Okay, how over the next 30 years or next, whatever it is, 28 years, are we going to get to achieve our net zero 2050 goals, which is essentially the point that you were making, right? That's why it's kind of an empty event, because really it's just a bunch of world leaders kind of patting each other on the back and talking about how important it is that we solve this stuff with actually no substance behind it.
Correct. And we're going to jump into COP in a minute for sure, and get into it, because I'm really keen to get your opinions on the 2 weeks that have just kind of ended yesterday. I think to the point about Greta, I don't disagree with you that there is an alignment there in terms of, you know, politicians, you know, giving it the big one, but doing nothing of substance behind it. Absolutely. My issue with people like Greta is she's doing the activist version of what the politicians are doing. Right. So she's out there saying politicians are saying blah, 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 blah. And she's actually not providing, at least, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jack, but I'm not hearing any concrete plans or solutions from her or her team. This is not a little 18-year-old that's rolling solo. She's got an army behind her. I'm not hearing anything of substance in terms of what, okay, well, if politicians are going blah, 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 instead of telling them they're going blah, 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 why don't you tell them the ideas you have for solving the problem? Because she has an unprecedented platform for someone of her age who's just been effectively skipping school for the last 3.5 years, right? And I know I'm drilling this down to a lowest common denominator, like just to get the reaction out of you there. But you know, I guess what I'm saying is nobody on the activism side or the political spectrum is saying, and I know you had somebody that you were talking about in one of the initiatives. I saw something on Twitter about it. You were talking to a guy, I can't remember his name, about what he was taking away from Papa, what he'd seen. Yeah. And I think, okay, well, under the surface, maybe there are some plans being discussed. I want to know what they are, because for someone like Greta, who seemingly has a platform whenever and wherever she wants it, I haven't heard anything of substance from her. So well, if I can be corrected on that, throw it at me.
I think this is the problem with kind of the direction that activism has moved in. I think that Greta Thunberg and the Fridays for Future kind of project has done an incredible job of mobilizing young people and pushed the conversation forward to a point where it's incredibly difficult to ignore the climate crisis and to not put attention onto it. I think that that's kind of the job of activists, is to shift the Overton window towards the point where you have to discuss this stuff. Extinction Rebellion as well, whatever you think about their tactics, they have made it so it's incredibly difficult not to have some kind of focus on the climate crisis in the national conversation. And they would argue that that is a success. And I would think it would be as well. I think the problem with the speeches often that somebody like Greta does is that if you have a limited amount of time, and I would want there to be far more focus on the substance as well, you want to rile people up, and it's kind of her job to rally people together. And it's far easier to do that if you're kind of rah-rah and shouty and than it is if you're talking about specific policy points. So I think that she has put forward things like, you know, banning investment into fossil fuels, or taxing the companies, the 100 companies that contribute 71% of, you know, carbon emissions. She has spoken about that kind of thing. It's not what grabs the headlines. So I think often what you see, and obviously, you know, there is a massive element of this as well, is the shouty kind of rantiness, and the substance gets reported on less. Where you're bang on, I think, is the fact that underneath a lot of this conversation is incredible individuals, incredible companies that are doing a lot to try and push the future of renewable energy, sustainability, carbon neutrality forward. So somebody like Max and Porterbrook, who are working on this, you know, this upcycled train that runs off of hydrogen, this hydrogen powered, you know, lots of interest into that at COP. That kind of thing is going on a lot. What they don't have is the platform or the investment from government and industry to be able to push forward as much as they'd like. So it's incredibly difficult. Part-time, I work for a renewable energy company that kind of support industry and academia in creating and talking about policy and how their work can be implemented into policy. And one of the most frustrating things for me is that oftentimes government don't want to engage massively with these companies and organizations as much as they should. You know, the fossil fuels lobby, the nuclear lobby are far more powerful and far more experienced in pushing forward their agenda. We're still seeing massive subsidies for fossil fuel companies. Fossil fuel companies are still researching new ways to drill for fossil fuels. There isn't the legislation that we need in order to meet the goals. And beneath the surface, there's a lot of technology that's being created, you know, whether it be offshore wind, floating wind, whether it be tidal power, you know, all of this stuff. But the question is, are people interested in discussing it, and are people interested in giving it the time that it needs to be able to push the agenda and the conversation forward? We'd much rather sit around and debate, you know, insulate Britain, gluing their heads to concrete, than we would actually talk about floating wind, which I get in a way, you know, it's far more kind of interesting and exciting.
But it's not. It's not.
Yeah, well, maybe,
like, if you're talking to me about floating wind technology, right, or tidal based renewable energy solutions.
Yeah.
When you start to look at these solutions, and they've been around, right? And they've been, conceptually around and being developed for some time.
Yeah.
The actual details of these projects is wildly interesting.
Sure.
It's wildly interesting. And if it will then form the basis and the underpinning of a new economy, it is within everybody's interest, not only to take advantage of the opportunities to, profit from a new industry developing, but also for the survival of your family.
Yeah.
The nuance of these conversations is the interesting bit. Greta standing up there or anybody else yelling is boring to me. And I know it grabs headlines, and I know, and this goes back to the media part of it, right? Is that the media doesn't care about the solutions. They care about the outrage, right? They care about the salaciousness of the movement rather than the details of the movement. Because I think talking to people who are developing renewable energy solutions are amazing. And I think they're wildly interesting, as I said. But we've got COP, which is just to solve the climate change issue, which is 26 years old. We've got these great people like, the gentleman you were talking about there, developing some of these solutions, but yet the funding's not there, yet the engagement's not there. So I guess we go to this place where, well, is COP just a facade?
I think so. I think so. I think that
is it the appearance of action rather than the want or the ambition of action? Like, do they intend? Because I feel this is all bollocks, complete nonsense, right? I think nobody is talking about, as I said in the show, nobody's talking about the bridge. The bridge are these companies. The bridge are these technologies. The bridge is the people who are committing themselves to building what that new economy looks like. That's the bridge. We're not talking about the bridge. COP didn't talk about the bridge. It said we're 1 minute to midnight. We're 5-1 down. We're almost dead, basically.
If that is the case, why are you not working night and day to formulate a plan that transforms society? Which there are ideas out there. There are tons of ideas out there. There are tons of plans and policy proposals out there for people to be able to do that. The problem that we have, and this is something that has just over the past 2 or 3 years been really cemented in my mind, is that we've been graced with some of the most uninspiring leaders, world leaders in modern history.
What a great way to put it.
They are a boring and pathetic bunch of people. When it comes to Boris Johnson giving that speech, we're 1 minute to midnight. If you genuinely believe that, would you not be,
moving heaven and earth?
Exactly, to have this green industrial revolution where we create tons of new sustainable jobs, where we transform the economy, where there are massive subsidies for renewable energy companies. We phase out fossil fuels completely. We finally destroy these companies that have decimated the earth. It's incredible the stuff that we could do, the infrastructure that we could put in place. Sustainable, the sustainable transport networks that we could have across the country, not just in London, across the country, that would transform the economy of this country. If you genuinely believe that this is that big of an issue, surely that's what you would be trying to do. Was it Biden talking about we need a war effort? I agree.
No, it was Prince Charles.
Oh, Prince Charles. I completely agree. But there's nobody really, apart from maybe some of the Scandinavian countries, that are looking at this issue in that way. Sweden, we put a post out on our Instagram to kind of accompany this interview about Sweden's transport network and how they've kind of revolutionized transport in Sweden in 4 or 5 years,
right,
way ahead of their goals. It's possible to do this, and it's good for the economy. It's fantastic for people's lives. It would transform the country, but there's no willingness, there's no political willingness to do this, and that's the problem. And I would argue, and maybe we disagree on this, but I would argue that the threat of not doing that is the transformation of the world as we know it. If we don't start to act and we don't start to meet targets, I don't think net zero by 2050 is ambitious enough. we're going to see the largest displacement of people in modern history. We're going to see cataclysmic weather events becoming the norm, people being killed en masse because of these events. If we think the migrant crisis is bad now, wait until whole countries are inhabitable, like cities are already. It's going to be chaos, you know.
Well, this is the thing, right?
So
yeah, go on, keep going.
No, everybody should be invested in wanting to solve this in as productive a way as possible. And unfortunately,
but little guys can only do their part, right? Little guys,
yeah, I agree.
Normal people, they can only do their bit. And I think I covered this briefly on the when I was speaking about it in the show previously.
Yeah.
Was, we recycle, right? We don't drive our car willy-nilly. I don't take it to the shop that's 5 minutes down the road. We turn off all our electrical outlets. But where are these government subsidies? My friend in Canada, right? The Canadian government was giving people rebates for their solar energy production. So effectively, they would pay you or give you a severely discounted rate to install solar panels on your house. And after you hit a certain marker, everything else that you gave back to the grid, you were paid for. It was effectively like having a renter that was paying like half of his mortgage for him. Where are these plans in the UK? I don't see any of it. And that willingness, that lack of willingness to make any material change just shows me, like you said, what a bunch of uninspired, boring leaders we have who are absolutely not interested in making any change materially whatsoever, because this net zero by 2050, well, 95% of the politicians we have in place now are all going to be dead. What do they care? All they want to do is ride out in the sunset, with their golden handshake and, as much lobbying money. And we'll get to some of the other aspects of that lobbying money, later on in the show. But, it's just, okay, well, if they're not truly serious, what's this facade all about?
I completely agree. On the point about what individuals can do, it's minimal, because the real change comes with the power of government, investment, and companies, industry, either being kind of regulated effectively, so like fossil fuel companies being regulated effectively, or those subsidies being given to companies that actually want to transform infrastructure or energy or whatever. So that's obvious. We will not deal with the climate crisis whilst fossil fuel companies exist in the way they do now. That just is a fact. Like, whatever you think about the free market or whatever, like, if you're serious about tackling the climate crisis, either these companies need to be told by, I believe, 2030 at the latest, you completely transition to clean energy, or you're not allowed to trade in this country anymore. They need to be told that, otherwise we don't move forward.
But looking at it, I guess that's the macro view, right? Because the government has to sack up basically and start telling people like Saudi Arabia, this is not the way you go forward if you want to, have all of your money invested in our property, all of your, all of the ties that bind us together economically. You can't have those anymore, right? That's a macro view of it. But there's also put your money where your mouth is, kind of on a more local level within this country, right? And I think I mentioned this on the show previously as well. It's like, when I look at councils and the local councils, I'm seeing these, they're telling us don't drive, cycle, walk, public transport, all of that, but they're not making any attempts to transition their fleet of vehicles into electric.
The thing is with that, mate, is that these councils, they barely have enough money to be able to function as it is. The amount of funding that they've been given has been slashed so horrifically over the last 15 years since the Tories came into power, that all they can do is put up those signs. And it comes back to, in my view, central government and central leadership to be able to fund local councils effectively enough so that they can make those transitions, because they will know, as a local resident, what the best way for them to transition is, what needs to be done. They will know as well, I would hope. So they need to.
Yeah, but then I see but then I see like where I live, Southeast London, right? I'm in the Greenwich borough, right? So I see the Royal Borough of Greenwich, and I see the council spending, hundreds of thousands of pounds on vanity projects, right? A couple of years ago, they spent £96,000 on a wishing tree, a good wishes tree in Greenwich Park, where you just like tied like a well-wisher's note to it and hung it up, and the leaves were made of all of these notes. £96,000 on this, you know, I don't know how much it's taken to construct the low traffic neighborhoods that benefit, you know, I guess you call them the top 5% of residents in the borough, right? All West Greenwich has is, you know, £1 million houses and up, right? Well, coincidentally, that's where our Labour Council has decided to build the LTNs. So all the children in the 3 schools that are around my house now, when they walk to school in the morning, they're being pumped full of fumes because this bottleneck has been created by our Labour councillors in how they've created these LTNs. This has happened in Enfield. This has happened in Greenwich. This has happened in Brighton and Hove. Like the number of LTNs that have been built and these cycle networks. And again, I'm not against cycling, right? But it's the way they're deployed, right? Are we actually trying to solve the congestion and pollution problem, or are we just trying to protect valuable voters? That's what I see on a local level.
Yeah, that's interesting, right?
You know, there's been millions pumped into local councils during the pandemic for, you know, emergency services and, you know, whatever they're allocating their money for. I'd love to do an audit on some of these councils. But, you know, now with the Afghanistan situation that just happened, they were given another influx of money to support the rehousing and rehoming of, you know, the migrants that have come over from Afghanistan. Again, I'm not in principle against this stuff, but we know what happens when you bring refugees into the country and give them support from the ground up, right? It is effectively a way of buying votes. They do it in America with the illegal immigrants that cross over, right? And if it's a Republican president, they're building a wall, right? But as soon as the Democrats are in, it's like, come on over. We're going to give you hundreds of thousands in support and relief money, right? That's buying effectively. You know, maybe I'm cynical. I don't know, but that seems to me as an easy way to buy some votes. So on the local level, I think there's a real accountability issue on how funds are managed within local councils.
Sure.
And I would love to see an audit on how that money is spent, because I see a lot of wastage that could be put towards better usage if we're actually serious about this climate issue.
I don't disagree with you in principle on the way that local residents should be consulted about how councils spend their money. 100% they should be. But again, you know, this is an issue with our political system. Yes. And the only people that can change that are those in government. I believe that we should be devolving powers to local councils and local people so they can be more engaged and more involved and hold to account the local councillors more effectively. I don't know if you've ever been to a local council meeting. I live in Dartford. I've been to local council meetings. There's like 3 people there.
Yep.
You know, and their decisions are being made oftentimes in ways that I disagree with, without any accountability from local people whatsoever. You know,
that's the problem with devolving it into the local space, right? Because before you devolve it into local politics and local decision making, you have to find a way of integrating the community into those, you know, into those decision-making processes. But the point, I think, of most residents, and again, maybe I'm being a cynic on this, is I think people are truly embedded with the thought, and maybe it's different for the younger generation, but I think for people who are a little bit older, they feel like, why would I bother? And that viewpoint is the most destructive viewpoint you can have when you want to actually impact some change, right? Because, well, that just lets them operate with impunity.
It does, but I'm never surprised that people think that, because people are given so few ways. We're not educated on how we can get involved in our local government and hold local councils to account over their decision making. So if you aren't able to, if you're not aware as to how you can influence things locally, when you look at the country nationally, you're going to think, fuck me, there's no way I'm going to be able to influence what's going on if I can't
do anything.
If I can't be in control of what happens on my street, I'm not going to be able to control what happens, you know, on a national level. We forget these people work for us. They work for us. We are their employer.
Yeah.
Like,
who you telling?
Yeah, right. Like it boggles my mind at how, first of all, how little control that we have actually over what goes on. You know, it's evident with the government at the moment and the approval that the approval ratings that have come out in the last few days. Mass disapproval, not only of Boris Johnson, but of Keir Starmer, of Ed Davey, political leaders that people just do not trust. So
Definitely.
when it comes to voting, first of all, we don't have a truly representative voting system anyway. So, you know, you can win power off of not having a majority of votes or what have you. But also, they can get into government and act with complete impunity with almost no accountability because of how fucked the system is. So, of course, people feel disenfranchised. And then people just turn away, you know, not interested, don't want to get involved with it, can't be asked with it. I've got to feed my kids. I've got to focus on, you know, paying my bills. So it's no surprise that people don't want to get involved. And until we start to solve those issues, the only way often people can voice their concern is through, you know, mass protest or gluing yourself to the floor or whatever it is, you know, like that's the only way that people feel like they can be heard.
Yeah, or you go on these rampages on Twitter where you just start tagging everybody you can, because I've found that's the only way that I can get any sort of dialogue with my local council, right? But the thing is, I've also been blocked by 3 of the major councillors in the Royal Borough of Greenwich, right? So one, I think that should be illegal. I don't think government and elected officials should be allowed by law to block constituents from commenting on them unless something egregious has happened, right? Obviously, we've seen what happened with that MP who was stabbed to death, you know, doing doing his, I don't, what do you call it? It's like a surgery. That's it. Very, very weird name for meeting your constituents. But, you know, obviously that sort of behavior should never be allowed to happen at all. But you should be able to look a counselor in the face and tell him he's a fucking idiot because of the things that he's done, right? You don't, yes, there's the proper discourse that you should use. Yeah. But when I can't get the garbage picked up on a regular cycle, as you said, if I can't even manifest change on my own street, there's got to come a point where some of that courtesy goes out the window and we start telling these people exactly how we feel about them without crossing that line.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, of course. And you push people to the point where they feel like they've got, you know, they have to go and call them a fucking idiot or whatever. Like
these councillors, mate, these councillors are getting elected in local elections by getting 2,500 votes.
Yeah.
But we're completely switched off.
When you look at the root cause of that, so voter engagement is a massive problem in this country, right? Where that comes from, in my opinion, is that we don't teach people about politics in schools. We don't teach people how important it is to vote and what power you can have, and, you know, the way that voting works and the way that laws are made and created, and, you know, these like fundamental underpinnings in this country. You know where they teach about politics from a really young age? In private schools. In the schools most leaders in this country come from, they teach about politics from a really young age because it's important. Yeah. And how are you going to create generations that believe that, first of all, the political system represents them, but also how they can get involved in creating change if you're not educating people about it? That's the first step, and we don't even do that. So, you know, it's all well and good. I think it's important to have these conversations, but like you say, it's about looking at the issues and looking at solutions, and oftentimes we don't even get to that point because we live in a kind of world, in a discourse, in a country that is so messed up, so divisive, that we're not even looking at the root causes. So
to you, the root cause is starting with education.
Yeah.
And getting that political dialogue started from a very, very early age.
No doubt.
I completely agree.
It's not even about ideology either. So, you know, that we're involved in the all-party parliamentary group for political literacy and political education, right? So, you know, having conversations about how this would be implemented in government, really productive, started by a group called Shout Out UK, who do really good political literacy and political education courses for schools. They're a really fantastic organization, and there's progress starting to be made. The stumbling block that people come up against often is people will say, well, you're just going to have, you know, either lefty teachers indoctrinating kids or right-wing teachers indoctrinating kids or whatever. We're not talking about teaching people about ideology. We're not talking about teaching people about, you know, what they should believe on foreign policy or on taxation or whatever.
It's the component parts. It's the component parts.
Absolutely. It's how the country works, how the political system works, the history of parliament, you know, the way that these processes are formed. That's what we're discussing.
Taking an engine
People can
apart.
make their minds up. Yeah, people can make their minds up as they grow up about, you know, their political beliefs and political ideology. But if we're not teaching people about the way that the country works and how to get into power and how to get involved in politics and why it's important, and, you know, X, Y, Z, how elections work, like I say, there's never going to be any solution to this stuff because people fundamentally don't know how to change anything, and that's a major issue. A major, sure. You're not even giving people the opportunity to have agency over their own lives.
So true.
How are they supposed to make it?
And then all it does is boils down into, like we said at the beginning, it's a yelling match between one ideology and the other, and it's just butting heads. And from a traditional, you know, government structure point of view, that suits them just fine.
Yeah, 100%.
Because nothing's going to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, in my view, the kind of the cynic in me would say that's the reason we don't teach about politics, or
except for even the next ones that are coming up,
except for private schools. Yeah, exactly. Because fundamentally, a lot of the people in charge don't believe that if you go to a pub or to a state school, you should be taught about that kind of thing. That's the fundamental belief, because they're probably scared about what happens, and rightly so. They should be fucking scared about what happens if you start teaching regular people about politics. Because they'll engage and they'll start realizing how broken things are, and then
not only will they
progress,
engage,
in my view.
Yeah, man. Not only will they engage, but they'll engage most importantly, in the right way. And that will be what impacts the change. They won't just be yelling through a computer screen on a social media platform, or, you know, talking to their local, you know, whatever it is. They're going to know the machinations of how the system works and be able to get inside of it. And the thing for me is, again, the root cause point that you made about this being education-wide discussion and teachings is, I think, the only way you start to make this change in any way, shape, or form. I don't see a way where, say, somebody like me, for instance, who has never been part of that system, just using myself as an example for lack of any other example, but someone like me who has no political affiliations, has never gone through those channels, how could I even get elected to my local council? Because, like, who the hell is this guy? You know, and unless you're some soapbox warrior that can really then just like capture the hearts and minds. But I think we're too embedded in our ideologies already, especially on a local level, to even have an impact on that. So I don't see how this can happen from a top down. It's only going to be multi-generational from the bottom up once we start to make that structural change in education.
Yeah, I agree. And I think social media is changing that. I think it's a lot easier for people to identify issues now than it ever was, you know, sort of through social media and the amount of how easy it is to access information. But with that comes teaching people how to use these things responsibly, and, you know, knowing where the sources that they're engaging with, and how to research properly, and, you know, all of that stuff is, again, really important as well, because people fall down rabbit holes. You know, it's definitely happened to me.
Or,
you know,
or you get pushed down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, exactly. And you have, you know, ideas that are wrong and they're not factually based, and et cetera, and you get really ingrained in that belief system. So, you know, it creates other problems that should be, you know, that should be dealt with. But I think, particularly with that education point, and looking at where we are, again, coming back to that, where we are within society and the direction that we're heading in. If we want to create a country that is effective, a great place to live, the best country in the world, whatever, you know, if you've got whatever your notion is, I want this country to be the best place to live on Earth. Not because I believe that we're inherently better than anybody else, but because I live here and I want to live in the best country in the world.
100%. Me too.
Yeah, the best education system, the best healthcare system, the best public services, the best transport, the best infrastructure, all of that stuff. Not some arbitrary idea of like what the best country in the world is. We need regular people to be able to engage in these processes. I wonder, did you see the video of Jacob Rees-Mogg being confronted by the disabled guy at the Conservative Party conference? He had cerebral palsy.
I did.
Did you see that? That's the sort of he wanted to engage with that gentleman, showed me how important it is that we give regular people the ability to be able to speak to politicians to account more effectively than any media outlet does.
Definitely.
You know, like it was clear that he was being held to account by somebody who had been pushed to their wits' end because of the way that they had been treated by decisions that somebody like Mogg has made. And that is powerful. When you give people that ability, that is powerful. And that's when you get actual change. And the Conservative Party don't want anything to do with that. And the only reason is because they know that they're running the country into the ground fundamentally. And they don't want to be held to account. They don't want to have those uncomfortable conversations. And that's not a good place to be. You know, that's not democratic, first of all.
No.
It's not a good place, not a productive place for a country to be.
But and I guess this is the problem with the political system, you know, at its root is, okay, does Labour solve that? Because I don't have any faith in that party at all. Like I was, you know, I've never voted blue in my life until the last election, because I couldn't stand anything about the Labour Party. Its focus on these distraction piece issues without, listen, the Conservative government has fucked up so bad during the pandemic, right? Yeah. It was literally, like, how could you not come off better with that bunch of clowns running the place? And yet Labour still look like a joke.
It's a great question.
I don't understand how you can give away, you know, I don't know how you can give away victory. Like you're just giving up the win. Like, no, we don't want it. We can't be bothered. Yeah. Let's argue about Islamophobia or anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, which is a goddamn joke in my opinion. You know, I don't think we've got, like, maybe there's some off the cuff remark. I don't know what the systemic issues around these problems are, but I can tell you what, they are nowhere near top of the list of priorities that an opposition government party should be focused on. It's absolute garbage. So I look to them and I say, well, the Conservatives are a bunch of clowns. They're clearly a bunch of corrupt, you know, nepotism-based individuals. But on this side, my choices are weakness.
Yeah. So this is, again, you know, a fundamental issue with I'm a Labour Party member, for the record.
I know you are.
Really unhappy with the position that the party's in. Couldn't agree with you more. The fact that, you know, we've only just taken the lead in the polls for the first time since, like, I don't know, a month or two after Starmer took over leadership is a joke, considering the way that the country's been run over the last couple of years. I think that the party is incredibly weak. The problem is we live in a quasi two-party system because of the way that first past the post works, so that voters are only really given two options unless you live in certain specific constituencies. Exactly. That's an issue, because you create a system where people can't be held to account properly, and they are put in the place where they go, well, I live in, you know, traditionally what's known as a bellwether seat. So the way that Dartford goes, usually the government ends up that colour, that party. If it's incredibly safely Conservative at the moment. If you live in Dartford and you go, am I going to vote Labour here? The Tories are just going to win. I don't like the Labour Party, but I don't like the Tories. I either, you know, vote for a third or fourth party and effectively feel like I'm wasting my vote, or I vote for a party that I don't actually like. Do we live in a democracy when that's the position that voters are put in? I don't think it's democratic.
No.
So the system needs overhauling, but the system's never going to be overhauled because it suits the people that are in power. Brett, I said that my co-director always says that, and he's exactly the sort of person that the Labour Party should be appealing to, right? Like proper lefty, social justice focused, like wants to deal with the issues that are impacting working people. The Labour Party, he should be a safe vote for the Labour Party, but he hates it because they're not focused on these issues, and always says to me the reason that Labour won't advocate for something like proportional representation, which would bring about a more democratic system.
That's like one person, one vote, count them all,
yes,
take the total, right? That's what that is.
Yeah, exactly. So if a party gets 40% of the votes, they'd get 40% of the seats. The reason that
true
the
representation
Labour don't advocate for that, is because it would destroy the Labour Party.
Yeah,
because all of a sudden you give other parties the ability to get into power. You don't live in this ingrained two-party system anymore, and therefore the Labour Party won't do the right thing and back it, even though the majority of its membership want to see it put in place. That's not democratic fundamentally. And then you get to the point where you have a government that is openly corrupt, and doesn't even give a toss about the kind of thing that they're doing. But Boris Johnson, in a speech, the UK is not a corrupt country at COP. The fact that he's even addressing that as an issue shows that there's a major, major problem.
Yeah,
but they can act with impunity because there's no accountability from the opposition.
In between his cat naps, next to Attenborough.
We haven't even spoken about that.
I mean, what the hell are we talking about? You got Joe Biden passing out, being woken up by one of his staffers, right? Yeah. He's completely conking out. You got Boris Johnson taking a nap next to David Attenborough, can't be bothered to wear a mask. Old man sitting next to, I mean, all of the things that they tell us to do, they can't be bothered to do themselves, right? It's an absolute joke. Being completely inclusive, okay, and then the Israeli delegate can't get in because she's in a wheelchair. It's like, minor issues and major issues, but it all comes down to one thing, in my opinion, and that it's an absolute farce. The whole thing, the whole structure, this, however many what did they say it was going to cost 20 million to run COP or something like that? What a sham. What an absolute sham.
Yeah, I agree. And, it's hard. I mean, I'm fundamentally quite a positive and optimistic person, but it's bloody difficult to stay that way when you look at the position that the country's in. And
listen, sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Go for it.
I was just going to say, you can be an optimistic person and you can be raging blood mad at the same time. And that's what I think I am, right? Because I think I'm a realist in the great scheme of things, but I'm optimistic about the possibilities, right? But I'm blood red mad at how things are being run, how things are being, just business as usual. We pretend to care, but it's business as usual,
That's the problem, is that what does business as usual has become corruption, avoiding issues, irresponsible spending of taxpayers' money, lying to win elections, becoming the norm, whether it be Brexit, whether it be the last two elections, just open. They don't care. They just lie. They lie. They do the opposite. They make a decision. They U-turn on it. There's no accountability, and you just think, what direction is the country headed in with the lack of opposition that we have? A government that has such a safe majority that they can act in this way. Finally, I think that the media, particularly newspapers, are starting to pick up on this stuff more. The Daily Mail, whatever's going on at the Daily Mail, they've started running front pages on task, because if we don't, and we keep heading down this direction, business as usual becomes all of these things, becomes corruption, becomes an undemocratic system that people just accept.
We're already in it.
Live that way.
We're already in it, and that's why and that's why I think, like, okay, well, what other than a revolution, and not to put my Che Guevara hat on or anything like that, because I don't want to be painted anywhere near in that light, but that, like, again, if we're going to go the education route, right, from the ground up, that has to start now. And you're talking 50 years before you see anything manifest off of it.
Yeah.
We haven't got that time. So what does it take now?
You mentioned that, the revolution angle. What position do you put people in where that even becomes a possibility or a suggestion? So something that I think it's actually Jordan Peterson where I first heard this sort of theory put forward, but the reason why effective governance is so important is because, obviously, for so many reasons, but you want to create a society that has some kind of stability, right? Mm-hmm. And when you don't do that, when you act with impunity, when you set an example of corruption, of not following the rules, etc., you are putting people in the position, many people in the position where they feel the only way to stop that is either through mass riots, mass protest, violence, and you don't want to get to that point. So whatever your belief is, you should want to live in a society that where those in power are setting an example that at least leads to some kind of stability. And I even think, as the Cameron government decimated this country through austerity and were responsible for tens of thousands of deaths because of austerity policies, that hasn't pushed us over the edge. That didn't push us over the edge. These corruption stories that have come out haven't pushed us over the edge. COVID and the way that the government has handled COVID hasn't pushed us over the edge. So have we just become a country that just accepts this stuff now?
We're becoming
140 people dead from COVID.
We're becoming not only a country, but I believe more widely a global community of zombies. I think the activists are the minority. I think most people would rather send a tweet than go out and march all day long. We've become a society of lazy people, of people who are scared in a lot of ways to break from their routine because they feel vulnerable already. I think we've gotten to a place where, and I know, you've got your thoughts on kind of how social media helps, facilitate the conversation, the important conversations, which I don't disagree with, but the overwhelming negative impacts of social media are turning us into just mush-brained zombies that really can't read past the third paragraph of an article or put a critical thought together if we were being held at gunpoint. I really, really, truly believe that the majority of people don't have the time, the knowledge, or the inclination to really make the structural changes required to unseat power, to make fundamental changes to the apparatuses in place that are bringing us down into these places. And I think we're effectively being frog marched towards a cliff.
I think that the point that stands out from what you just said to me the most is that people don't have the time, the inclination, the ability to be able to stand up to this stuff. And that's the most worrying part to me. Most people in the country they don't have the time to be going out on marches. They don't even have the time to be on Twitter. Most people in this country are focused on putting food on the table or working 3 jobs to support their kids, to pay the bills. They're not sitting in a podcast having a discussion about this stuff.
No, they're not.
They don't have the chance to. So the system is set up so that people don't even have the ability or the opportunity to be aware of what's going on because life's so fucking difficult.
Yeah.
We don't pay people an effective enough wage. There isn't the support system that people need. There aren't the job opportunities that people need. There's not the housing. There's massive inequality issues that, in my opinion, come down fundamentally to class. That if you start to address those issues, and perhaps we can get into the policy specifics if you want, but if you start to address those issues, the country is transformed in a few years. But the system suits those in power, the elites in power, so much that they're never going to address that stuff. And like you're saying, what becomes the alternative? It's either like violent revolution and protest that I don't think anybody should want, or continued march towards some kind of tyranny, which is where we're heading. They can't be the only two options. That's a bad position for countries, not just this country, but countries around the world to be in. So it's so bloody important that we start to address this stuff before we get to that point. You know,
I think go on.
No, we should never want the society to be approaching that. It's not funny. It's not good. It's not
funny. It's fucking dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really dangerous. But I think everything, again, you know, God, you could unpack this for days, right? But because of the political structure we have in place, and because they fear disruption to the status quo that benefits them solely, they are taking all of the measures in place to make things as hard as possible for us, right? You see what's happening with energy prices. You see what's happening with the consumer price index. You see what's happening with inflation, with what's happening with the COVID measures and the restrictions being put on our movements and our liberties and our ability to even, you know, earn a decent living. I see, and we'll get into the vaccine mandates in a little bit, right? But all of this is, and again, I've said this on a previous show, but Dominic Cummings, whether you like him or hate him, right? If anything that he said about what he released about Boris Johnson is true, that is proof positive that they like the chaos. Because whilst the chaos is ensuing, you're looking at all of these other things and you're not focused on the prize. And the prize is the disruption and dismantling and reformation of the political system in a fundamental way.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you look, the Cummings stuff is a really good point, and you know, maybe a segue into some of the COVID regulations and the corruption stuff, because the fact that it had to come, somebody that actively created this or helped to create the system and that we're in, particularly with COVID, the fact that they were sacked and then through a vendetta released all of this stuff that everybody in government knew, it had to come to that point is pathetic. The fact that that's the sort of country that we live in, like that is, you know, I think Dominic Cummings is
go on, Jack. Go on, Jack.
No, I think he's a weak, sort of tragic case of the kinds of people that are involved in our politics, and I think a lot of the glamorization, if that's a word, of, you know, Cummings and the Brexit campaign and all of this stuff, I think a lot of it is facade and a lot of it is nonsense. I think fundamentally what we are looking at with people who are in government, particularly on the front benches, is that they are weak, insecure, egotistical, soft individuals who are only out for their own good. It's about settling personal scores. It's about benefiting your mates. It's about maintaining the status quo. You know, that's what they're about. And the fact that we don't have opposition parties who are up there confronting that every day is pathetic in itself. But also that a lot of the truth that we've seen about this government, about whether it's, you know, the COVID regulations or the corruption, has come from people leaking information because of the fact that they've been stabbed in the back themselves, and not from work that's been done by the British media. A lot of it has done. I don't know if you're aware of Byline Times. They've done a lot of reporting on the corruption stuff. They're a kind of new media outlet. I would really recommend reading their stuff. They're fantastic.
Byline Times.
Byline Times, yeah, BY-Line Times.
Perfect. I'll check them out.
Yeah, they're really good. Sam Bright is the name of the reporter who has exposed a lot of the COVID procurement stuff, the PPE procurement scandal.
Okay,
they've done a lot of but there are outlets that are doing this work, but a lot of it has come from leaks, you know, from inside government, because people are pissed off or whatever. There's a vendetta. Like, it's pathetic.
Nepotism doesn't have like a start date and an end date, right? It has a start date, right? And that for these guys is probably the schools that they go to. But that nepotism is never supposed to end. And as soon as you stab somebody as soon as you wrong a guy, then it's game over, because these guys, all of the people that are involved in this system are narcissists. They're weak little narcissists. That's it. When everything goes right, it's all they're doing. When everything goes wrong, it's everybody else's fault, right? And if you slight a person, there's no responsibility. There's no accountability from any of these people. It's always and this, maybe we wrap COP because we've gone here, and here, and I love it. But maybe to wrap on the COP thing is exactly that. What I heard from the leaders was, you guys need to do more. We need more money to start having the conversation and the plans in earnest, but you guys have to take it upon yourselves to do everybody's fair share. And it's like, that's always the way. Give us more money so we can funnel it into the hands of the people and continue that nepotism on a really smooth journey, whilst telling everybody who puts these scumbags in power in the first place that it's all on you guys. You need to do more. You need to take accountability. You need to recycle more, drive less, you know, all of this stuff. It's garbage. It's absolute garbage.
It's 100%. It's the whataboutery that does my head in.
It's the like whataboutery. With this, that's it.
Yeah. This 2-job thing, right? You know, that's come out, and like we've known for ages that politicians have like jobs on the side. It's you know, they this viewpoint that people in this country should be able to live on whatever it is, £50 a week, but also that 80 grand a year isn't enough for an MP to be able to live on to do their job. You know, there are politicians in this country that hold that view at the same time. It's so funny.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
It's like, oh yeah, I've got 3 jobs and I lobby for companies and I benefit companies based on those jobs, and I use my parliamentary office to have meetings about you know, anti-bac gel that the government should be adopting for the NHS. But this person did it as well. You know, there was a Labour politician that did it. Like, yeah, that's wrong too, but it doesn't excuse what you've done. You know, take some fucking responsibility for your actions for once in your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely, dude.
It's the lack of leadership, the lack of individual responsibility, you know, the lack of personal ownership.
It's the lack of self-awareness of the absolute hypocrisy of the things that they say.
Yeah, but a lot of these individuals have never been confronted about this kind of thing in their life. That's the problem. So they believe that they can just act with impunity, like we've said. So,
but also there's nothing stopping them from acting with impunity.
Exactly. And I think that we're starting to see that. Like the Owen Patterson thing was the best example. You know, it's like so funny to watch. Just to encapsulate this, right? The investigation's been going on for 2 years. Independent committee runs this investigation. They find that he was using his position as a member of parliament in a corrupt manner. You know, he's got 2 jobs by 2 companies. He's paid 200 grand a year by these 2 companies. And he was using his position as an MP to lobby on behalf of those companies. Profoundly corrupt, obvious to anybody that shouldn't be allowed. Not only did the government back him completely to the hilt, they went to overhaul the entire system to protect him, the entire investigation system to protect him. Then when they were criticised, backtracked on it after they had put Alok Sharma in, like for about 24 hours, Alok Sharma straight was arguing after the decision was made and after that vote was pushed through that it was the right thing to do. And then the next day, they U-turn fully on it and expect people to just pat them on the back. Yeah, we've seen the error of our ways, and it's right that we have these things constantly under review and we're able to change our minds. It's like, do you think are we that thick that we can't see through that?
We are. Not we, but some people are, because they'll say, oh, okay, whatever. They'll pay no mind to it. Pay no mind to it. That's what these governments do, Jack, in my opinion, is they push 2 steps forward. They get the resistance, so they take 1 step back. Ultimately, they're still 1 step ahead of where they were. And if they do that multiple times over and over again, they get to their end goal. That's what they do. They did it. I don't want to jump ahead because obviously we're going to talk about the vaccine mandates and stuff like that. But that's what they did with the vaccine passports. Boris Johnson was on television saying that's not how the UK is run. We are not a country that mandates things like that. And within a couple of months, the conversation escalated to the point where, oh, well, we're looking at it. Oh, okay. Well, okay. No. Oh, okay. Here we go. And then it's 2 steps forward. There's a little bit of pushback. They say, okay, we went too far on that one. And then they wait, and then they go ahead with it anyways.
And then the news cycle has become so ridiculous, and there's a new corruption story every day. So it's impossible to hold them to account effectively for the thing that happened last week, because there's like 4 or 5 new things that have cropped up. So you're on that treadmill constantly. So it becomes like, it's impossible to cover this stuff at times. We sit there and we're like, how the fuck do we cover this? Because it's ridiculous. you know, I can't imagine what it must be like to work in political satire or political comedy, because nothing is funnier than what is going on. Nothing is more ludicrous or ridiculous. You can't make it up.
No.
It's absurd that is the system that we live in.
Well, and talking about the Grahams, it's Graham, right? His name. What was the guy's name that you were just talking about? I always Owen.
Well, there's two, right? Owen Patterson.
Owen Patterson. That's it.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, there's also this like cash for access thing that's been going on as well, right? And I was doing a little bit of reading about this, and what's the guy's name? It's not Bill Elliott or something like that. He's the chairman of the Tory party, right? Or the co-chair of the Tory party. What's his name? Do you know his name? Is it Bill Elliott or Ben? It's Ben Elliott. That's what it is. Ben Elliott. So Ben Elliott is the co-chair of the Tory party and their main fundraiser. Okay. Yeah. And and he is now, so basically he runs a company called Quintessentially. Okay. Quintessentially is a concierge service for rich people.
Right.
So they called him up. Oh, I need swans at my wife's 50th, right? I can't be bothered to do it, but I know she likes swans. Can you sort that out for me, right? Yeah. This restaurant just told me it was all booked up. Can you get me a table by the window at that restaurant? It's that sort of service that he provides, right? Well, he's also the co-chair of the Tory party and their main fundraiser, right? Also, he's the nephew of Prince Charles, right? And he's been setting up these Quintessentially clients with an audience with Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson, all these different ministers for 250K a pop, right?
Pocket change.
For them, it doesn't matter. But now they're finally looking into it because these rich motherfuckers that have access to these politicians are going in because they're so capitalistic minded. They're saying, hey, your policies on Brexit are really fucking up my business. Your policies with COVID are really fucking up my business. Smarten up. And now they're starting to be influenced by these rich donors, facilitated by somebody who is right in the system. And it's no different to the Owen Patterson thing, right?
This is the way that things have worked for decades.
Forever.
Like, it is, you know, like go back to tie it into COP. If you're a fossil fuel company and you're aware of this service and you say, you know, more and more discussions are coming up about different regulations to stop us from doing the work we want to do, or banning fracking or this kind of thing, 250 grand to them is like, it is
peanuts.
Literally, it's peanuts. So we go, we'll bone you 250 grand and we'll go for a dinner and we'll say, Rishi, look, we're so happy with the work you're doing at the moment. You're doing such a fantastic job. The one thing that we were concerned about is, you know, this new legislation that was coming up. It's going to be pretty bad for us. And, you know, maybe you should revisit that. And this is what we would do instead. And we'll work with you to develop this so you can work alongside business. Otherwise, we might have to make your life a little bit more difficult with the kind of support and the donations and all of this stuff. It's inherently corrupt. It's open.
And do you know what this Ben Elliott calls this? It's called an advisory board.
Right. Okay. Like just
it's called an advisory board, but the people who meet in it, right? So let me just find this real quick because this example is hilarious.
So it's an advisory board, but you could be part of our advisory board if you pay X amount of money to be able to access it, and then you can influence policy directly.
But they categorically say that none of the meetings affect policy decisions. Yeah. Right. So no. It's just because they want to have dinner with them. Right. They just want to have a bit of a chin wag with them, just a friendly little bit of banter with them. That's what they claim it is. But it's called the fucking advisory board. Yeah.
It's so transparent. It's
so transparent. So, dude, so let me give you this example, right? Because I read this on this is on YouGov. And this is, I can't remember the guy who wrote the piece, but basically says this. He says, earlier this year, a property developer and donor, Richard Desmond, conveniently found himself at dinner sitting next to Robert Jenrick, the community secretary and the minister with the ultimate say over planning issues, just at the moment when he was about to adjudicate over one of Mr. Desmond's projects. Within days, Mr. Jenrick had overridden his officials' advice and given the project the go-ahead. Mr. Jenrick vociferously denied there had been any connection between the dinner and the decision, claiming that the planning application hadn't even been discussed. Doubtless, they had been far too engrossed talking about the relative merits of Burgundy versus Bordeaux, but such was the stench that ensued that Mr. Jenrick soon changed his mind and found some PR formula to explain why he had originally misspoken. It's so transparent, dude.
Yeah, and it is, and it's difficult to even put into words how crazy of a situation it is, because, and that's the point that we get to. It's blatant, obvious corruption. In any sensible country, that person should never be allowed to be in politics again.
Ever.
Robert Jenrick is a fucking idiot anyway. He should be nowhere near the decision-making processes in this country, nowhere near the policy creation processes. And it's fucking dangerous, because you look at somebody like Rupert Murdoch, who has had intimate access to politicians since Thatcher. These are individuals who are so powerful that they're dictating a lot of the agenda in this country. What's on the front page of the Sun, for example, is often what's informing a lot of voters, right?
Yeah.
The Sun have backed every winner of an election since since Blair, I think, maybe even earlier. So there's massive power, and it informs the way that we look at politics in this country. It forms the way that we look at decisions. It controls and dictates what we read, what we think about, what we think is important. There's no wonder the country's gone to the dogs.
For sure. And speaking of absolute incompetence that should be nowhere near the decision-making procedures that affect our country, I want to move into, if we can, just talking about this vaccine mandate, because
Sure.
I always get his name wrong. Sajid Javid? What's his name? Yeah. I couldn't care less. Obviously, they've come out now, and this happened obviously in Australia first, or France first, Australia, how they're talking about either, healthcare workers are fully vaccinated or they lose their jobs. And I didn't think that, again, this is one of those, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and, do that process all the way out, over and over again, and you're going to get to the goal that you want to get to. What are your thoughts on mandating vaccines for one, but mandating vaccines for, I guess, the healthcare workers specifically, because that's now something that they're being faced with?
Yeah. So complex issue, multi-layered, right? And different opinions based on the category of making it mandatory for me. So I don't agree with mandatory vaccines as a whole. I don't think that people should be forced to take the vaccine if they don't want to. I think people should take the vaccine.
Me too.
But I don't think that they should be forced. The difficulty when it comes to frontline workers, and I'm not actually, I'm going to hold my hands up and say that this is something that I've kind of gone to and fro on. I'm not sure what I think about it. Is that if you're a frontline worker, which is you only are going to be mandated to take the vaccine if you have face-to-face contact with patients, and there are 3 layers of exemption. So for religious reasons, for health reasons, and if you're a healthcare worker and you don't have face-to-face contact with a patient, they're going to be.
I thought there was only 2. I didn't think the religious exemption was in there.
Was it not?
I thought it was 2, but I'm happy to be corrected on that. Yeah.
So yeah, let's go with that then. So I think that it's probably right that if you're a frontline worker and you have face-to-face contact with already vulnerable people and you have a duty of care, that you should do everything in your power, and it is your job to protect those individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that taking the vaccine for COVID falls into that category. I'm uncomfortable with mandating anything, particularly vaccines. The thing that swayed me on this, so I agree with it, I would say categorically, was you have to take the hepatitis vaccine. That's already been mandated. Okay. If you're a frontline worker. And if there's consistency, and we say to these individuals, you can only do this job if you're going to do X, Y, Z, I don't necessarily have a problem with that.
Okay.
I think the problem comes where and I don't think it's an easy decision. I think it's tough and it's complex and it's nuanced, and I totally understand the argument against it. I think the problem comes with they've got until April to be vaccinated, right?
Mm-hmm.
If there's a mass exodus of staff over this, the health system crumbles.
Correct.
So is there a plan? And totally major respect to anybody that walks away from their job over this. Is there a plan to replace those staff if there's a massive walkout? There's none, right? The repercussions of this are perhaps the NHS crumbling if there is a massive walkout. I think it will majorly increase the amount of people that are vaccinated, but there's big concerns and there's big, things that need to be kind of contemplated and brought into the decision making. But fundamentally, I think that if you're a healthcare worker, a frontline key worker, and you're in contact with patients in a situation where many of them are vulnerable, many of them aren't going to be able to have the vaccine because of pre-existing conditions, and you could possibly save a life because you're vaccinated, I think that you probably should do it.
How come we don't mandate the flu jab?
That is a great question. I don't know, because again, that consistency for me is an issue.
Right.
Many people die from the flu, so it would be logical for me to say that the flu jab should be mandated for them as well.
Right.
And again, the consistency is the issue, right? That's where people get confused. So I don't know what the reasoning is. I think that Javid said that they're not going to look at mandating the flu jab. I don't know why. I don't know how you can make those arguments simultaneously. I think it's probably hypocritical. And that kind of, that lack of logic leaves it open to people questioning your decision and the intentions behind your decision. Particularly when so many people are concerned about the vaccine anyway, when I don't think there's been enough education about the vaccine in general and how it was developed and the processes that it went through and how it works to reassure people to take it. You leave yourself open to criticism from that. So yeah, the lack of consistency is a problem, and it's a horrible position to be in. And if we dealt with the pandemic properly in the first place, we probably wouldn't be in this position anyway.
100%.
So yeah, I don't know. It's difficult. I hope that kind of answers the question. And
it does. I just, again, it's not for you're right or you're wrong, right? It's a conversation, it's a discussion. But I feel that the measures being taken in these steps of mandating certain industries to be fully compliant or lose loss of earnings, loss of the ability to feed your family, et cetera, I think this is a perfect example of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, because as I said, our prime minister told us they would not be putting anything around vaccine passports, limiting our access based on medical, right? That was never happening. A month or 2 later, they start to introduce it after the pushback had happened and then calmed down a little bit, right? And then it was on to the next thing that we can do to impart our control over the populace, because that's ultimately how I see this. This is not about them wanting to solve this problem, because I don't think that they want to solve this problem. I don't think they know how to solve this problem. And I don't think it gives them any benefit really in solving this problem, because mandating a vaccine for healthcare workers is 1 step away from mandating it for another industry, and then another industry, and then everybody. So if you're okay with it being mandated, and again, this is just an open question, if you're okay with it being mandated for healthcare workers, are you okay with it being mandated for everybody for the same reasons, a duty of care to protect fellow citizens?
The only way it is being mandated if you want to continue to be a health worker, right?
Yes.
So you're not saying there are any, it's a form of coercion, but it's like soft coercion. So the repercussion of you not having the vaccine or choosing not to have the vaccine is that you lose your job, right? That's it's bad, it's coercion, of course it is. But there are kind of logical reasons behind it, logical enough for me to go, okay, I understand that decision making and think that it's probably the right thing to do. Mandating it at large, I think is and then, you know, the question is, what's the penalty for that? You know, if you don't have it, you know, what's the punishment for that? If that's the kind of hypothetical that we're putting forward, is more of a infringement on individual liberty, because you're it's a good question. I'm second guessing myself now. This is the problem with this topic.
This is the problem.
Because, you know, it's
because if you're okay with vaccine mandates for healthcare workers, right, but you oppose it for the citizenry at large, we're creating a mutually exclusive group that are being forced to be mandated into doing something. Those people are first and foremost citizens. They have a right to exist. They have a right to earn a living. They have a right to...
They still have that, don't they?
Do they?
They still have that. They just can't hold that position.
Right. So you've been in the healthcare system your entire career, some 20, 30 years, right? And now you're being told that if you don't want to put this jab in your arm, that you lose your job. How is that in any way, shape, or form like fair? For one. Two, a step away from fascism.
What do you think of the seatbelt example? So
what do you mean?
I read a piece on this a couple of nights ago. So the argument when seatbelts were brought in were that most of the time I don't need a seatbelt. It's an inconvenience for me to wear one. But the application of seatbelts protects the society at large. So if you believe that the vaccine works and the vaccine reduces transmission and it has efficacy, and that vaccines traditionally have eradicated many illnesses and improved society at large, do you think that particularly for certain professions where you have a duty of care over people, and you have a duty of care, you have a duty to protect, and you should do everything within your power to be able to do that, that inconvenience, the benefits of that inconvenience kind of override the negative attributes? So, you know, I should have the freedom to not have to wear my seatbelt if I don't want to, but it's in law that you should wear your seatbelt because we have recognized that that's something that's a piece of legislation that will save lives.
Right. And I think when we look at the seatbelt example, what you can see from the historical rollout of seatbelts and their invention, and I read something or heard somebody talking about the invention of seatbelts and how opposed people were to them fundamentally, right? Yeah. And it was just like, fuck that, I'm not doing that, right, at all. For me, the problem, the differentiation is between the thing being a product externally versus the thing being an intrusive cocktail that we don't have any long-term data on, right? We have some efficacy data, right? But again, the 2 steps forward, 1 step back thing. We were told, take the vaccine, you'll need 1 dose, and then that'll be it. You're sweet as a nut, right? So, and then it's like, oh, actually, we got that wrong. Now we need 2 doses, right? Yeah. And then you're sweet, and then you can do what you like. And then all of a sudden it's like, actually, this thing that we created that we've made everybody take, or that we want everybody to take, it lasts for about 6 months. Then you're going to need a booster, right?
Is your opposition to it, the mandating specifically, is your opposition to it the lack of transparency or the actual, right? So if they would have said from the outset that, you know, if they hadn't have said, no, we're not going to mandate it, if they'd said, we are going to mandate this, as soon as the vaccine is there, NHS workers have to take the vaccine, would you have less of an issue with it?
No.
Right. Okay.
It's the mandate.
Right.
It's the mandate. Right. It's the fact that they can implicitly just say, it's like when they were releasing the lockdown laws, right? They were audacious enough to say, we're giving you your freedoms back. You don't have the right to take them away in the first place. This is a human rights issue.
Though, wasn't it? That was always bollocks. That they were giving us our freedom. Like, that was propaganda nonsense in my view. That they were like,
expand on it for me. So,
you know, when lockdown ended and they dubbed it Freedom Day or Super fucking Sunday or whatever it was. Yeah. That was about bumping up the government in the polls. I think most people understood
No, but what I'm talking about is what they were saying, not the Freedom Day slogan, of course. Right. Yeah, absolutely propaganda, right?
So it was the retraction of freedom, the fact that the government.
They were saying you cannot do this. As a citizen of this country, you cannot interact with your neighbors or your family or go to this place or travel to here. You can be outside for an hour a day to exercise. You can't do anything to solve your mental health problems, but we'll let you walk. You know, and if you're walking in the wrong manner, you could get a £10,000 fine. We're going to give you all that freedom back now. We're going to remove all of those things we told you couldn't do, and you could be penalized for them, right? This is another step forward in terms of that control policy that they're putting in place. For me,
do you think that's fundamentally what it's about? It's about control and coercion.
100%.
I think, particularly when it comes to the lockdown case, I think the argument for lockdowns, and like, I think we should have locked down sooner, and I think we should have locked down harsher for less.
Because I think the lockdowns did absolutely fuck all.
Well, I think the lockdowns in the way that we did them.
Oh yeah, yeah, okay. Oh yeah, okay.
Right. So what I would have wanted was, as soon as the virus hit, like Italy, you know, when it was like decimating through Italy, what I would wanted to have seen was for us to shut the borders. Don't allow people in, control the country. We're an island. We're perfectly positioned to be able to handle this kind of thing.
100%, and eradicate it.
Absolutely. And then the country can start to get back to, like they did in New Zealand, like the country can start to get back to some semblance, or not even get back to, but the country can continue on, you know, sort of functioning without the need to have to do that. The problem that we had, and the problem that the government had, was that indecisiveness element. So they weren't strong enough to say, we're going to do this. These are the reasons behind doing this, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to update you every day on our decision-making process and what we're thinking, and we're going to get this over with as soon as we possibly can. What were they saying? There's nothing that we won't do to stop this from happening. There's no amount of money that we won't put out to support people. It's all nonsense. It's all nonsense.
Just like we were overtly prepared to deal with anything that came our way. We were stocked and ready to go. We had, you know, we had the war chest of supplies and everything like that. And it was 3 weeks to flatten the curve.
Yeah. And that inability to be able to control the virus effectively from the start, don't forget, the policy was herd immunity. The policy was, let's let as many people as possible get this, and then we'll be okay. Against all the scientific advice that the government was getting at the time, Boris Johnson's thought was, we'll just let people get it. If old people die, we don't care. You know, that's what we'll do. And it didn't work. And then they had to backtrack. And then they weren't strong enough to say, we're going to enforce a really strict lockdown for a limited amount of time, support people financially effectively enough so that they can you know, support themselves, and then get the country back on its feet. We're still contemplating a lockdown at Christmas.
I know.
The virus hasn't gone away.
I just put a 50 quid bet on my mate that it's definitely happening.
You reckon?
100%.
What kind do you think will happen?
I think it'll be like a level. I think it'll be like a level, level 3 lockdown kind of thing. Like, you know, just before we got all of our freedoms and liberties back, just before we were out of that part, I think they're going to stick us back in that part. They're going to tell people, if you can work from home, you absolutely should be working from home. You should minimize how many times you go to the shop. You should minimize the interaction with people who are not in your household. If you get a positive test, you probably have to isolate. I think that sort of measure is going to come back in probably at the end of this month.
Yeah. So like I say, I you know, fundamentally don't have an issue with lockdowns as a way of controlling the pandemic from the start. But the way that they've been applied, I think, has been a disgrace. And the toying with people's freedoms is a massive issue, because that's not something that any government should take lightly at all, ever. Because governments do have the power to be able to do that. Legislation does give governments the power to be able to do that. And that's a huge responsibility to say to people, we are going to take away some of your liberty to be able to protect people. And if you believe that, which I do, if you're going to take that decision, you need to give effective reasons behind doing it, convince people that it's the right thing to do, and not take the piss. And that's what the government have done consistently. In so many ways, not just with that decision making.
And continue to do that, in my view, with how they're starting to now go further with the mandating of who has to take these in order to survive, in order to provide a living for their family. My problem with, again, you know, the litany of issues I have with mandates is it never stops, right? Government doesn't give back power, right? Once they've got it, they tend to keep it. right? That's the authoritarian nature of a narcissist, right? They don't like to relinquish power that they've then got within their grasp. They like to keep a hold of that. And so what we're seeing here is a mechanism of how we can continue to control, because we're, as a society, Jack, what are we, 80% fully vaccinated now? Like,
yeah, what, double dose? I'm not sure actually what the number is, but
it's enormous. The amount of people that are double jabbed is enormous, right? But the efficacy of these vaccines is such that we're still seeing massive cases. We may not be seeing the amounts of death, but again, if we look at the statistics around the deaths, then that provides us a profile with who is most vulnerable to succumb to a virus like this, right? My problem is the vaccines have a certain efficacy that can be debated. Some people are saying it's as low as 45% now, right? Really, really poor. They're saying that the booster, forget that conversation altogether. The booster's going nowhere near me, right? And really? I'm double jabbed, right? So I'm double jabbed, but that's it. That's the line I've drawn. The reason I got double jabbed is because I want to be able to travel abroad, because my wife's mother lives in Portugal. We haven't been there in a long time. So there's there's that family aspect and that mental health aspect that's really, really important to me. So I said, okay, the hill I'm going to die on is not going to be one where I'm going to, try this kind of experimental drug, right? So I did it. No side effects, absolutely fine. I have not had a flu shot in probably 25 years. I do not intend to be sticking COVID medicine in my arm every single year going forward, once or twice a year. I'm not doing it. There's absolutely no reason. And the reason that I say that is because this conversation, since the inception of COVID, there has never been a conversation about getting the health of the nation right. There are comorbidity factors here that can really be instrumental to boosting your immune system so that you can have an easier time if you were to contract this, right? So let's take into account the fact that I'm double jabbed, right? Well, I'm also 40 years old, right? So I'm just on that precipice of kind of being in the older generation that becomes more vulnerable to this disease. But I exercise 5 days a week, right? I take a pharmacy's worth of vitamins every single day. And I think I've had COVID twice.
Really?
I think I've had COVID. I think I had COVID at I think it was the beginning of March last year when it all started, because there was a time, it was like a few days where I was a bit under the weather and it didn't really seem like a flu, let's say, right? And then there was a period of a day and a half where I felt off in myself. And I know how I feel, right? I'm pretty in tune with kind of how my body is. And there was a day and a half after I was vaccinated where not directly after I was vaccinated, but after I'd been vaccinated, some time after that, where I felt a bit off. And I was like, well, I'd been out, I'd been mingling, so it was possible, right? I took a test, but those lateral flow tests are garbage, right? They don't work. And it gave me a negative result anyway. So I don't know. But my point is, rather than mandating another drug, because that's what we do in Western society, right? We put a Band-Aid over the problem rather than going to the root cause of the problem. Why not mandate exercise? Why not try to mandate physical fitness? Why not try to mandate health rather than mandating medicine?
I think it's a really good point. I think that my argument would be, let's do both of those things. That would be my argument. There are some people within society who, for whatever reason, can't have that level of fitness. They can't take that many supplements. And
but there's also there's also an amount of people in the society that cannot take this vaccine.
I agree.
So do they get left out? Like, we're creating exemptions for people who might get really fucked up by the vaccine, right? Because they've got underlying conditions that would give them an adverse reaction to it. So they get an exemption on medical reasons because they're vulnerable already to this vaccine. But people can't have an exemption if they're effectively healthy and don't need to stick drugs in their body?
They do at the moment, right? They do at the moment have the ability to have an exemption because you can just not get vaccinated. That's fine. You can do that under law.
Not if I work in the NHS.
Sure. Not if you're a frontline, NHS worker. I think that the answer to me, and obviously with a lot of these issues, is that there's a multitude of ways to to work around these issues. 100%, we're an unhealthy society, and health needs to be far more. Well, we need to deal with the fact that there's an obesity crisis in this country, that many people have underlying health conditions because of their lifestyle. That comes through, giving people the proper education, ensuring people can earn enough money to be able to feed themselves effectively and properly. All of that stuff is really important. And then
do we have the ability as a community to have a logical conversation that just looks at data? Right? There are outlying circumstances that say a healthy so-and-so got COVID and died from it, or got COVID and got really sick from it. But the absolute overwhelming majority of people who get really bad COVID, really bad symptoms, they're generally in this category.
It's true, but getting the vaccine isn't just about protecting yourself, is it? So like the argument that I would put forward for why I'm vaccinated, I'm in a category that is incredibly unlikely to die from COVID.
Exactly.
Not only because I'm 23 years old, but I'm incredibly active, don't have any underlying health conditions, have never really had health problems in my life. I don't want to give it to somebody, I want to protect, as a society, I think it's important that we have that kind of focus of, protecting each other. And the vaccine, from the evidence that I have seen and the arguments that I've heard and the information that I've taken in, is that the vaccine does that. So that's another reason why I'm vaccinated. Both my parents have had COVID in the last 2 weeks. It's been rough.
Really?
Yeah, they've really struggled. My mum particularly.
Are they double jabbed?
Yeah.
So they're double jabbed. They're in a vulnerable. I don't want to cut you off. I just want to break it down, unpack it. So they're both presumably in that sort of vulnerable age category.
Early 50s.
Okay. So early 50s. So up the scale a little bit in terms of the vulnerability. They've both been double jabbed. They both contracted COVID again, and they both suffered with it badly. Yeah. Why'd they get vaccinated? Because otherwise they'd be dead, effectively?
Maybe. Who knows? I think probably at least one of my parents would have been in hospital if they hadn't been vaccinated.
How are they health-wise within themselves? Do they follow a similar lifestyle as you?
Yeah, maybe not as rigorous. Like I ran a half marathon a couple of weekends ago. Maybe they're not like to that level, but we eat.
But you would consider them healthy?
Exercise, yeah. If they hadn't have had the vaccine, fuck knows what condition they'd be in. But also,
do they have any underlying conditions themselves? No. They don't. Okay.
I haven't caught it.
Right.
We don't live in a big house. It's pretty difficult for us to keep a distance. I don't know whether the vaccine has had something to do with that. We've been pretty sensible with what we've done. I haven't contracted the virus. I haven't contracted the virus at all. I think that PPE has been important in that. I've masked up in public places and been sensible and washed my hands and that kind of thing.
Yep.
I live a healthy lifestyle and look after myself. There's loads of stuff that we can do to kind of mitigate against these factors. And you're right in terms of not being able to have a sensible discussion about and give over, effective reasons. I think every reason that you have outlined about not getting a booster I can respect that. I could totally respect that. And I think that it's important that as a society that we don't force people to take decisions over things or we don't, mandate for people to do things like that we convince people that it's the right thing to do, that we
right,
educate.
Because you got to win hearts and minds, right? By evidence and data and by honest sentiment and honest evidence and honest analysis of what these medicines are, rather than, like what Piers Morgan's been doing today, right? Posted a picture of himself getting the booster jab and then called anti-vaxxers a bunch of dumb fucking idiots. You know what I mean?
It's not helpful at all. It's not the sort of thing that I'd do. I've got a question about the mandating.
Go on.
If a frontline health worker refused to get the vaccination, contracted COVID, and then gave COVID to a patient who died, do you think that they are relinquishing their responsibility or their duty of care?
It's a great question. It's a great question. And I think there's a lot of nuance around it, but I don't know, man. It's a tough one. So we're saying, we're saying a healthcare worker refuses to get the vaccine, gets COVID, gives it to a patient, that patient dies. Yeah, that's a tough one, man. That's a tough one. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the answer to it, Jack.
It's hard. It's difficult. This is why I've struggled so much.
Yeah, no, I completely get it. The thing that trumps it for me in all conversations, in all areas of it, is the individual's right to choose what they do, rather than being told, given the conversation that we've had to this point about the incompetence of government, about the nepotism of government, about the corruption of government, about the dishonesty of government, for those same individuals to have the power to turn around to the people who have kept us safe, who we were out on the streets every Tuesday night applauding, to then turn around without giving them so much as a valid, useful raise, and for their contributions and for their 18-hour days that they were working, triple masked and all of the rest of the thing, for then these incompetent bureaucrats who get paid for audience, for that, all of the things that we've talked about, they can come down and they can say, hey, you either do what I'm telling you, you don't get a choice in the matter, or you lose your job.
Yeah.
I am so pro-liberty and so pro government staying the fuck out of my business that I reject. Why? Okay, so let me throw it to you this way. If the government was so absolutely dead set on the health of the nation, why can we still buy cigarettes?
Yeah.
They don't give a shit about our health, Jack.
I think
if they wanted to really show us that they cared about our health, they would be prioritizing health and fitness. They would be banning the most dangerous substances on the planet. I can go to my shop as soon as we hang up this call, and I can buy a bottle of vodka this big. I can buy a carton of cigarettes. I can ingest them all, and I can go back, albeit if I can walk, I can go back and I can do it again. Or I can pass out here and I can wake up the next morning and I can do it again. And I can do it over and over and over and over.
Yeah. And I think the argument for that is that individuals should have the right to be able to put in their body what they want to put in their body, right?
Absolutely. So, including medicine.
Yeah. But it's difficult. And I think that the thing for me, the situation for me, and this is why I don't know, is that I think fundamentally we shouldn't even really be having to have this conversation, because COVID should now be at the point where we're having to force people to get the vaccine because it's still that much of a threat. We really shouldn't be at that point.
But I think the tides on these mandates and these willy-nilly kind of, throwing these ultimatums at people, I think the tide on this is shifting. Like if I look at what's happening in Australia and New Zealand and America,
the Australia stuff is a different kettle of fish, because the way that they've been dealing with COVID has just been fucking bonkers.
Yeah.
I think that there are levels to this, and I genuinely can't see the UK getting to that point with how stringent they've been. I think there's fundamentally different cultures, and I can't see, look at the amount of people that refuse to use the track and trace thing that, hundreds of millions of pounds were wasted on. We don't do things like that, like in that way in this country.
We don't right now.
Sure, and I have faith that we wouldn't get to that point.
I'm a little bit more cynical than that, I think, and I think that's probably just a difference of opinion between you and I. But I think I truly think that's where they're trying to get us to. They're trying to get implicit control over us. I don't know what this government, like, think about it from a decision-making perspective. I don't know what they would gain from that. Control.
Yeah, but to what
social scoring.
Right.
Social scoring. I don't think this, so again, maybe tinfoil hat a little bit. I don't know, right? What's happening in China, I think Western governments are looking at and saying, we want some of that. We want to be able to control people. We want to be able to control their movements. We want to be able to tell them when they've been good boys and girls and when they've been bad boys and girls, so we can allow them access to things. And if they comply, they get access. And if they don't comply, they don't. I think this is what is, because maybe you've heard me talk about this on a previous episode, but this World Economic Forum, this kind of rollout of the United Nations digital passport, the great reset that the World Economic Forum talks about, right? And in their promo video, they say we're rebuilding the future where you'll own nothing, you'll have no privacy, and you'll love it, right? It's this kind of bullshit that they're, and again, I can send you the links on Twitter if you haven't seen it yourself, but you know, I think that they are actively rolling us into a social scoring system and into a control mechanism society that is based around these different pieces that they're currently putting in place right now, right? Health is one. Do me a favor, after this, go and look at the United Nations Digital Passport Initiative. Okay. And then let me know what you think on Twitter about it, because what they're effectively trying to do is they're rolling this out for United Nations employees now. It's got your travel data in it. It's got your medical data in it. It's got your social data in it. It's got your educational data in it. It's got your employment history in it. It's got everything. And the way that they frame it is, well, if you leave the United Nations and you go to another place, we can just zip and zap all that stuff over there, and then you're all sweet and ready to go. It's simplification, right? But it's not. These are control dials. Because if they know every single thing you do, they remove your ability to be an individual, because they can turn the dials at their will to manifest the decisions and the outcomes that they want. That's where I see this being the end goal for them.
I don't know enough about it to comment, and I'll take a look and I'll let you know what I think, because it's really, I find this stuff really, really interesting. Where I see that happening is with technology companies, large conglomerates, with advertising, with you know, tracking data through analytics tools, Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, this kind of stuff, controlling patterns. I don't know what the thought process of the World Economic Forum is internally as to why this thing is a good idea. What I do know is that Facebook are collecting data and compiling data profiles on individuals to sell to companies, corporations, governments, in order to influence voting patterns and voting behaviors. Like there is evidence behind that stuff. That is all happening. We know that this stuff is going on. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility. There are corporations that are doing this stuff at the moment as we speak, you know.
I can send you a bunch of info on this from these technology companies. I don't know to what extent that this is occurring and this is going on, and to what extent that governments are involved. I don't know. I can't speak to that. And maybe I'm 4 steps too far ahead again with my tinfoil hat on. Who knows? Only time will tell, right? But what I see, I guess, what you can infer from things when you're being told you don't have a choice, and the alternate to not doing what they tell you to do is loss of living standards, loss of wage, loss of the ability to support yourself as an individual, leads me to believe that the control mechanisms around what they're doing is for a bigger purpose. Because when will they say, when will COVID be done? Right? When will COVID be done? So are we saying that every person that starts to work for the NHS going forward will have to be vaccinated and have to be put on a booster program, or they don't get to be in our health service? Like you said earlier, if that's the case, our health service is going to collapse.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, again, it's interesting. And I think that when we're having conversations about the future of the country, the future of kind of, you know, the world, I suppose, these conversations need to be had. It's like, what sort of society do you want to live in?
Yeah, exactly. And I just go back to Orwell. You know, if we look at Orwell and you know, whether it be, you know, 1984 or whatever, like,
I think I would say it's an easy time to be drawn into that kind of thinking. And
I agree.
You know, I think that perhaps it's not as, I think that it's incredibly difficult to imagine that there's something that large scale occurring that would be able to be applied to the Western world in that way.
Really?
Yeah, I think so.
Interesting.
That's my kind of instinct.
I think when you've got 1 billion people plus already in one, and we live on a planet now that 2020, you and I can have a conversation like this, and North Korea is a real thing.
Sure.
I think somebody said it, and I don't know who it is. Somebody said, if you think you'd be charismatic to, if you think that you would be impervious to deny a charismatic dictator and wouldn't fall foul to, a Hitler or whatever, a Mao or somebody like this, if you think that you would be impervious to their charm, just look at the world, right?
Sure,
because right now, 57% of the entire global population is being governed by non-democratic governments.
Yeah. But it's an issue for sure. The authoritarianism is on the rise globally, populist
for sure.
kind of sentiment around the world, increased control. This kind of stuff is on the rise. There's no doubt about that. But to the extent and how organized it is, I don't know. I don't know how organized it is.
Yeah, and please don't get me twisted in terms of thinking like this is a cabal of like 15 people at the top that are like, kind of puppet mastering. I don't think it's like that. Yeah. I think what I'm more trying to get to is the fact that looking at the things that we've already talked about today, the corruption, the nepotism, the narcissism, all of these terrible, terrible traits that are infected in all of our leaders, both in this country and, other Western governments, it stands to reason that the potential expansion of that control would be a goal that could serve their purposes further.
So I look at my life and like on the point of, or not feeling like you could ever fall under an authoritarian regime. Like, of course, I'm not that naive to believe that it could never impact me. But I look at my life, I look at the work that we're doing, the stories that we're covering, that kind of thing. And I think what could possibly stop me from doing that? Would I give my life for those values fundamentally? That's the question. And I think I would.
Yeah.
I think I would. Obviously, I've not been put in that position. But I think I would, like we'll come to the Uyghur stuff.
Yeah, I want to get on to that in a minute.
Shortly, through that, the campaign and doing work in human rights, the human rights area over the last year and a half, you meet people who have been put in that situation and have shown the courage to step away, whose family members are currently in concentration camps, and if they've got the courage to stand up against that, in having no autonomy, no control, no power, when the easiest thing they could ever do is hold their hands up and give in, I think the least I can do is continue to talk about these things.
Absolutely.
And not let anything stop me from from doing that. So
absolutely,
I don't know who's trying to take control and power away from us as individuals, or who's trying to remove that autonomy. All I can think and all I can say is that just I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm not going to allow these things to infringe on my freedom as much as I possibly can.
Absolutely.
Talk about them, fight back against them, and have conversations. That's what we can do. That's the power that we have as individuals, right?
And it is that raising awareness and continuing the dialogue to keep, whatever these kind of malicious intentions are, whether they're there or they're a figment of many's imaginations, it's to keep them at bay and keep them out of any position where they can create momentum. Right. And I think when we look at people who, escape the Taliban in the Middle East, or they escape North Korea like Yunmi Park, and comes to America, the reason that these people can at least like some iota of that ability to stand up to that and to make a break from that is because there are places like the UK and like America. And that's why I take it so seriously and try to think about it as I do, is because once those bastions of hope are gone, then there is no place to escape to. You don't get to go and live a life in the land of the free anymore, right? Because when you start to mandate people's behavior and people's access to things, you are on a in my opinion, you're on a slippery slope towards a version of that. And I want to see, like you, I want to see that nowhere near our society. And that's why I speak about them.
For sure. And I think particularly with the vaccine mandates, you know, we ran a couple of polls on this, well, really a few polls over the last few weeks. It's been really in the news about NHS workers. And you're not alone, mate. A lot of people have the same concerns, the same issues. So, you know, regardless of what your view is on vaccinations, we have to listen to people. We have to listen to what their concerns are. And there are justifiable reasons behind people's concerns, and they need to either be they need to be listened to, and those individuals need to be represented, and there needs to be proper explanations behind why these things are happening, and why, you know, and transparency and accountability behind this stuff, and that's what there isn't at the moment. So that's what leads.
I agree. I agree. It's a great point. Listen, I want to get to this. I want to get to this China. I want to get this China issue, because we've been going for about 2 hours. This is my kind of jam. This is my kind of jam. But I know this is a subject that's like really near and dear to your heart. I've seen the activity that you've been doing supporting the individuals, which I'm sure you'll go on to mention in a moment. But it's really it's really an issue that needs to be put on more people's radars, because I've mentioned this. I was actually, it's funny enough, because I was mentioning us doing this conversation to a colleague yesterday, and we were at the pub for lunch. And as we were walking back to our office, there's a Uyghur restaurant in central London. And I said, I've walked by this place 100 times, easy. Never noticed it. Yeah. But it was funny how it was almost like a kismet moment to kind of raise some awareness about, because he was like, because he couldn't pronounce it. The kid couldn't pronounce it. He was like, what's a UI word? Like, like, right. And just because he had no reference for it. Right. And so I was telling him a little bit about what's going on, and he was skeptical. He was like, no. Surely that. I said, mate, I've got a really good friend who lives in Taiwan, who's been on the show before, who has done business in the region and all around mainland China. Yeah. And it's not only is it going on, it's way worse than anybody knows. Yep. And when you mentioned it to me when we were talking back and forth on Twitter, I said they have perfect opportunity, because you've got firsthand experience dealing with victims in this. I've got secondhand information based on, you know, what my friend has told me that he's seen and that he's, you know, heard himself from other people in the region. And then I've got that third hand information, which I've read that's sourced from somebody else. But I really want to take the time and let you just kind of speak on some of the activities that you've been doing with and around this Uyghur situation in China. And I mean, we can call it for what it is. It's a genocide. It's a concerted effort, you know, and a manufactured genocide that is that is going on over there. But for people who don't know, you may be able to say it more eloquently than I can. Can we give a top-down view of what's going on there, and then get into some of the things that you've been dealing with on it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you giving me the time to speak about it, because it is so important.
It's important, man.
So you should go to the Uyghur restaurant, by the way, because the food is unbelievable. Uyghur culture is incredible. So for those that don't know, the Uyghur Muslims are a Turkic minority community that live in the western region, the Xinjiang region of China. It's often referred to as East Turkestan as well. Yes. And they're a minority community that, you know, for a long period of time have kind of been persecuted against, but has particularly over the last 15, 20 years become kind of more concerted, a more concerted effort. And it began, there were a series of terrorist incidents, and the kind of crackdown and persecution towards the Uyghurs particularly started after these incidents. Uyghurs haven't had the same rights, and there's been lots of Uyghur groups who have kind of stood up for Uyghur rights in the region. that has led to the Chinese Communist Party cracking down pretty harshly and infringing on rights increasingly. So started off with the sort of segregation of society, forced labor, imprisonment, setting up of re-education camps, or so-called re-education camps, they're concentration camps, torture, abductions, murder, violent rapes, sexual assault, forced abortion, forced sterilization, some of the most horrific crimes against humanity to be committed. To the point now where there are up to 3 million Uyghur people interned in camps in China. Now, not just Uyghur people that are being persecuted against, other minority groups have been as well, not to the same extent as the Uyghurs. And this has gained traction over a period of time, thanks to the courage and bravery of the Uyghur people and the Uyghur communities across the world. Many Uyghur people have fled from the region, have left family members after family members have been abducted. Many of them haven't seen or heard from any of their family for years. They can't contact family in China, even if they know of their numbers, because if you contact a family member, that family member will be put into a camp. So, you know, we've seen kind of mass displacement, and through that, and through the continued genocide, incredible campaigns have been set up around the world to sort of fight against this. So the World Uyghur Congress, I would say the World Uyghur Congress, the Campaign for Uyghurs, and Stop Uyghur Genocide in this country have particularly pushed the calls forward to the point where we're now starting to see not only the persecution be recognized, but also governments kind of doing a little bit more in order to get justice for the Uyghur people. So what the campaign has started to do is set up conversations within governments, within parliaments, to recognize the genocide. And when a genocide is recognized, you have the obligation, the responsibility to protect, and the obligation to do something about what's going on. The UK Parliament voted to recognize the genocide. The US Parliament have done so, the Canadian Parliament have done so, various parliaments in Europe have done so as well. And what we need to see now is the kind of disruption of supply chain sanctions towards not only the CCP, but also to individuals who are directly involved. So there's something called Magnitsky sanctions that can be applied to individuals that sort of freeze individuals' assets, stop them from traveling, stop them from working in different countries, that will start to hopefully see some kind of justice for the Uyghurs. But what has happened because of the amount of forced labor and the reliance on China in the global economy is that slave labor and forced Uyghur labor has now become a massive part of global supply chains, and we are all, without knowing it, kind of implicated in this genocide, the largest genocide since World War II, that is being persecuted. So if you purchase anything from China, more often than not, depending on obviously the region that it comes from, that would have been created by slave labor, forced Uyghur labor, particularly cotton. 80% of the world's cotton comes from the Xinjiang region. You know, so a lot of clothes, a lot of corporations are wrapped up in this knowingly. So, you know, anywhere from Nike to most high street fashion brands use this cotton.
Yep.
A lot of tomatoes are kind of, you know, it's another, so high
tomatoes, really.
Yeah. So a lot of products, you know, will come from that area, will be from this labor. So I mean, it's maybe to talk about some of the individual stories.
And we're back. Little technical issue there, but we're all sorted.
Yeah, sorry about that. I just wanted to touch on some of the individual stories as well, maybe. It's such a large issue, it's difficult to encapsulate just the scale of what is occurring. And I think that when you try and picture 3 million people incarcerated in camps in this, you know, kind of forced labor, forced sterilization, all these things going on. It's difficult to picture, and that's why I think it's perhaps sometimes met with skepticism in this day and age, with the technology available and kind of global accountability mechanisms, which we'll get to in a second. It's difficult to really picture just how horrific this stuff is. So there's a couple of stories that I wanted to touch on, and something that's been incredibly powerful for us to be involved in, not only in the parliamentary campaigns and meeting people from the Uyghur community, meeting survivors, meeting individuals like a lady called Rahim Ahmet, who is one of the sort of Uyghur leaders in the UK.
Say the name again,
and does a
Jack,
lot
please.
in this area. Incredible person. She meeting people like her, meeting people in the Uyghur community at the Uyghur Tribunal, which was set up to provide a place to hear evidence on what is currently going on, what is currently being perpetrated, for Uyghurs to come and give evidence, to come and tell their stories, for former guards, for academics and researchers and leaders of organizations, and an independent panel has been set up to pass judgment on what is occurring. So is this crimes against humanity? Do they believe a genocide is occurring? And then to recommend the steps for governments to take. And the reason that is so important is because China, the two accountability mechanisms for an organization committing genocide are the International Court of Justice and the United Nations Human Rights Court. China has veto power over the UN Court for Human Rights, so accountability can't be met through the UN, and it doesn't recognize the International Court for Justice, the ICJ. So you can't have accountability through there because they don't recognize that the court exists, or it has any kind of sovereignty. So this is why an independent tribunal is so important. And through that, there's a few stories that we heard directly from individuals who had been in camps. And the first was a gentleman who had been tortured in one of the camps. This was actually the first piece of evidence given in the first hearing, and he brought with him the chains that had been used, the same chains that had been used to keep him imprisoned, and he put them on. So heavy metal chains, chain linked, clamped to his ankles, clamped to his hands, forced to move around to live in a cell with multiple other people. We're talking 8 to 12 people per cell, without a toilet often, particularly in the older camps. Systemic torture, the use of something called the tiger chair. I'm not sure if you're aware of the tiger chair. It's just this horrific sort of metal chair that clamps your feet, your arms and your body in an incredibly uncomfortable position. And interrogation is done using this chair. It's a recognized piece of torture equipment. You can't, it's against international law to be able to use it. The vision of this man sort of reenacting the sort of process that he went through was, pretty horrific for the first thing to see, during the tribunal. A lady who was interviewed via, sort of video conference. A lot of people gave evidence via video conference. Okay. She had 3 children. This is maybe, this is pretty horrific stuff, right? So just like a warning for anybody listening, I guess.
No, it needs to be talked about. It needs to be exposed. Her children needs to be demonstrated.
Her children were taken from her. She had 3 children, 3 babies, and they were breastfeeding at the time. The the children, because obviously they were reliant on their mum, were force fed via tubes that were inserted into their necks. One of the babies was kept in such horrific conditions that the child froze to death. Those children have scars on their necks, and this woman is giving this evidence, and just the bravery of these individuals to come forward and tell their story when oftentimes members of their family are still in camps. They're risking their families' lives by coming forward and telling these stories. As this lady's giving this evidence, two of the children come on screen and she's crying. They're consoling her. They're standing next to her while she's telling this story. And just the bravery of these individuals to be able to go through that anguish and that inhumane treatment, to be able to then pass that on to a tribunal who are questioning quite forcefully about their experiences, because obviously, somewhat understandably, they need to learn about what is occurring. For them to be able to do that, the courage that they have to show, the bravery that they have to show, is, it's a kind of life altering moment for those of us who were there to listen to. Once the Chinese government, who refused to recognize the fact that the tribunal was sort of sovereign and was going on, was independent, they've smeared it. They said the guy chairing it, Sir Geoffrey Nice, is a MI5 agent. They have said that the people giving evidence are just paid actors. So these individuals that have gone through this process, they've escaped, or they were released from these re-education camps and have relocated, are paid actors. They're lying, they're making it up. None of this stuff ever happened. And unfortunately, there are many people that believe that is the case, that don't believe the stories of the Uyghur people.
Why?
And I don't know. I think in many of these cases, probably because it's so difficult to picture, like I said, what is going on. And there's tons and tons of evidence. There's tons of research. There's satellite evidence.
I was going to say, can't you see this stuff from space?
Yeah, there's satellite imagery and pictures of the camps, of people kind of blindfolded or with hoods over their head and chained up. And there's tons of evidence. But that doesn't stop many people from believing that this is just a smear against the Chinese Communist Party, that these people are actors. And we're talking about tens and tens of people that came forward just for this tribunal to give evidence, people that provided witness statements, individuals who haven't seen their family. The fact that anybody can believe that this is a concerted effort to discredit the Chinese Communist Party is absurd, absolutely absurd.
Of course.
And the highest form of barbarity to believe that anybody would lie about that kind of treatment.
Exactly.
So what these campaigns aim to do is not only give a place for the Uyghurs to be heard, which is the most important thing, for the victims to be heard, but also to get justice, and lobby governments to be able to, for them to take concrete steps. Whilst the British government, to their credit, have done decent bits and bobs to be able to hold, the CCP to account, like voting through Parliament that a genocide was occurring, they still refuse to use the term. The government still refused to use the term. Like individual sanctions to some individuals, but not everybody. So there's the architect, or the kind of recognized architect of the genocide, a man named Chen Quango. He also was the sort of architect of the persecution of Tibetans as well. Yes. And has sort of replicated that process towards the Uyghurs, just in a far more sort of systemic way.
And evolved.
He hasn't been sanctioned. The British government haven't sanctioned him. They're still seemingly, even though they say they're not, they're still seemingly pursuing different trade deals with China. They won't disrupt supply chains. They won't force companies to not, or they won't penalize companies that have labor that comes from China or purchase stuff from China. So there's a long way to go. We have seen, positive steps for some concrete action to be done, but unfortunately, time's run out, in order to do something to stop this from going on. And fundamentally we're allowing a genocide to occur under our watch in, you know, this day and age, this year. The sentiment that never again will we see a genocide, never again will we see a persecution, working towards those ends, they're empty words, they're empty platitudes, unfortunately, because we're allowing this thing to happen and go on. So it's important that people talk about it more. It's important that something gets done more, and the Uyghurs can see justice, you know, in their lifetimes, and they can see their family members again, and the people that are perpetrating this genocide get held to account, because it is some of the most horrific crimes imaginable that are occurring. You know, they're two stories of you know, millions that could be told.
Yeah, and they're pretty harrowing. And, you know, again, you say they're two stories of countless stories. And, you know, I've heard stories similar to those and even more extreme than those, in terms of, you know, some of the ones that don't make it are effectively just, you know, organ donators after that, that they are putting onto the black market and things like that. As you say, the forced sterilization and the forced abortions and, you know, so on and so forth is just, it's the most heinous and horrendous thing to picture. And as you said, 2021, we exist in a world where there's so many positives, there's so many, you know, great things to celebrate every day, yet, you know, we can't be consumed by those, you know, by those easy things, by those comforts, when there are such volumes of people being subjugated in such a heinous and awful way. And, you know, it doesn't take too much joining of the dots to see why a country like North Korea can still exist in the world today, when they are effectively partnered by China, supported by China, funded by China. You know, the CCP, they're playing 100-year game. You know, they've always had the 100-year game. They're doing the Belt and Road Initiative. That is their main thing. And it seems to be going on uninterrupted for the most part. And they are now what seems to be exercising the experiment, for lack of a better word. We call it genocide. It's genocide for sure, but it's the forced labor element of it that's going to help them manifest the supply chain in the cheapest, most profitable way for their own ends as well. And, you know, through that, the destruction and the horror stories that you've kind of demonstrated a couple of there are just, for the CCP, the price of doing business. And this is a price that should not be allowed to be set out in the first place. It shouldn't be encouraged. It shouldn't be, it certainly shouldn't be engaged with, you know, from the supply chain, from the economic perspective, just because we can have cheap and convenient. And, you know, the people that need to stand up to this are the governments of the world for sure, but also the leaders of the industries that are, you know, woven into these supply chains, woven into these manufacturing plants that they have over there. You know, the likes of Amazon, the likes of Nike, the likes of Levi's, the likes of, you know, all of these different manufacturers that we could go on and name for, you know, I'm sure the next half an hour easily. It's time for the accountability. And I think social media, to your point that we were talking about earlier, is really a critical tool that could be used for the benefit of helping raise awareness about how serious this is. And I hope that there's more visibility on it. I hope there's continued pressure on them. You know, I'm reluctant to be optimistic about it because of how big China is, because of how integrated they are in everybody's lives now. And the fact that, you know, us, America, have basically handed them this position of power through our want of convenience, through our want of cheap, accessible products. It just seems that, you know, we've effectively, you know, we've put the tires on the car, you know, that have allowed them to drive these people and these trains to these camps and allowed them to do these things. And it's just horrific.
That's the point, though, is that we need to confront the fact that we are part of this. Mm-hmm. And we have the responsibility to act. And it takes a bit of bravery. Yeah, of course, nothing like compared to what the people that have decided to talk about it have displayed. But it does, to stand up, you know, to these regimes and to discuss what is going on, and actually to take some concrete steps to hold China to account. Yeah, of course, that does take a bit of bravery, and it will alter the economy, and there will be repercussions of it, and it will impact the Chinese people. But what you have to look at is the alternative, and that is that you allow the destruction of a people and a culture and a history to continue, and that is not a price to pay for anything.
Correct. Absolutely right.
That is the aim of the Chinese Communist Party, this is a direct quotation, to break their roots and break their lineage, break the roots of the Uyghur people and break the lineage of the Uyghur people, and destroy Uyghur history for the all those reasons that you outlined, the continuation of the growth of their economy, this forced labor. We're seeing like the systematic destruction of mosques. So it's cultural genocide. It's genocide in its rawest form, because because of the forced abortions, because of the torture that has occurred, because of the murder. So it's horrific, and it takes the world to stand up and act.
It is, and it takes it. And I don't mean to cut you off, but it just takes me back to some of the other things that I've talked about in relation to China in past episodes, with on my own and with other guests as well. And it takes me swiftly back to the NBA, and the NBA. When the Hong Kong protests were going on, and there was a general manager for the team called the Houston Rockets that spoke out and said, we stand with the people of Hong Kong. And that was it. And the CCP then threw backlash at the NBA to say, listen, you better retract that statement and shut your fucking mouths about anything that you say going forward, or you'll lose your TV rights. They suspended the TV rights of that team immediately. And then LeBron James comes out, the biggest figure on the global sports stage, arguably, certainly in basketball, and has obviously been told by, the people within the organization, there's too much money at risk here. You better go out and make a statement that this GM that stood with the Hong Kong protesters was misinformed. Yeah. Completely whitewashing the whole entire situation for profit. And I hope with folks like yourself and the commission that's holding this independent tribunal, I hope that industry can be swayed away from this cheap, convenient manufacturing supply chain that allows them just to profit and profit and profit, whilst, as you said, there is a systematic cultural and humanitarian genocide going on just because there is there's effectively a difference with them. Yeah. And you have to I know people that have been sanctioned. I know organizations that have been sanctioned, individuals that have been sanctioned because of the way they've spoken up, but they don't care because they're doing the right thing. And fundamentally, you have to ask the question, like we came back to earlier, how much do you believe in your morals? To what point are you willing to fight? Yeah. And for these individuals, it's life or death. Correct. So for us, if it means not being able, like for some people, if it means not being able to enter China, that's a small price to pay 100%. For the fact that the individuals who you're standing up for, their lives are at threat. Their lives are in danger. That's what we're talking about. Absolutely. And from my perspective, it was the Uyghurs, but it was specifically in relation to the Hong Kong protests. Yeah. Time before that, it had already really started because I've fallen out of love with the NBA. But since that, I have cut off all the social channels. I don't watch the games on television. I refuse to buy any athletic gear that is centered around that NBA economy until they stand up and actually take some action and say, you know what, if you want to ban our TV rights in China, go ahead. Yeah. We're not going to stand for this. Yeah. This is more important than the bottom line. But I mean, the sports conversation is a whole other conversation, right? You just have to look at the takeover of Newcastle to realize how quickly we're able to step away from our morals in order to turn over some money. Absolutely. I don't know if you're aware of the player for the Celtics, the Boston Celtics, who's massive on Uyghur justice. Yes. I can't remember his name. Oh God. I know exactly who you're talking about. He's amazing. He's amazing. I know. I can't remember his name. somebody will shit on me for not remembering his name, but
he's incredible and he's done a bunch
yeah.
of great stuff. But look, sports again is it's a massive issue. You know, I don't want to, we could probably get into that for another hour, but you know, there's so much of the world that is entangled in this, and so much that we as individuals are. So what I would say to people is the findings from the Uyghur Tribunal come out in December the 11th, I believe is the date, but maybe the 9th, the 11th, like that time. Keep an eye out. Please keep an eye out, and if you can,
where do people go, Jack? Tell people where to go. If you've got any links, we'll obviously put those in the description below. But if there's anywhere you want to direct people to go and have a look for more information or any of that stuff, let them know now.
So Stop Uyghur Genocide are the UK-based organisation. Their website is, you know, at Uyghur Stop on Twitter, stopuyghurgenocide.co.uk or stopuyghurgenocide.com. There's a youth-led organisation called Yet Again who do incredible work on human rights. Check them out. They're amazing. Eloise Bishop, our campaigns manager, has done work in this area. We're currently producing a documentary on that's kind of involved in the tribunal and talking about kind of the Uyghur people, the Uyghur culture, and particularly with a focus on how that question you asked, how do you hold a country as big as China to account? You know, what are the steps in which we can take to be able to do that? So that'll be out sometime next year. The campaigns are growing, and I would say get stuck in and do what you can and learn about the issue, learn about what's going on, and listen to the Uyghur people, share their stories. There's maybe a few individuals that I could direct people to. As I say, Rahima Mahmut, Rayhan Asat, her brother Ekpar was an entrepreneur. He's been interned in a camp. She's an incredible individual. Her work, her campaigning, tireless campaigning has been amazing. The World Uyghur Congress as well, they're fantastic. Campaign for Uyghurs in the US. They do amazing work too. So that's who I'd say
amazing.
Get in touch with. Write to your MP. Like small things like that make a massive difference. If we can get a question in PMQs or a question raised in a debate, or that kind of stuff is huge as well. But you know, that's what I would say. It's important that we do what we can as individuals, and remove as much purchasing of products made from China from your life as you possibly can. That's what I would say. Be aware of where, you know, what you purchase is, where what you purchase is coming from. And you know, we can start to pressure you know, the country to act and the world to act. But it's crucial. It's crucial that we do so.
It is, and it's going to take a mammoth effort against a mammoth organization like the CCP, you know, and nothing but collective sustained pressure will be the thing that, you know, ultimately, you know, drives this into the history books, you know, where, you know, it should never be in the first place, but unfortunately it's going to. But we only can do our best to try to reflect it as, you know, the honest tragedy that it is, and the horrendous genocide that it is, and calling it anything other than that is misrepresenting it in the favor of the Chinese Communist Party. And we should be holding a mirror up to them, and we should be holding them accountable at every single turn in every single way that we can. And the only thing that's going to do that is through highlighting stories like you've done today, the work that you're doing, the work that all of these great organizations are doing as well. And, you know, that makes me optimistic, because like you said, there's people that are really, really fighting on this. And now we need the big, you know, heavy hitters to come to the table as well and say, you know, we're not going to take this shit anymore. So, so that's amazing. Listen, I think that's a good place to wrap, Jack. What do you think?
Agreed. Yeah.
Tell people about Demographica, where they can find you guys, and all the social links. Again, we'll put them in the show notes and everything like that. But it's been an absolute pleasure. This is probably our longest podcast that we've ever done. So so you hold that title now, for sure. And it's been a fantastic conversation. But before we go, tell people where they can find you guys at.
Sure. So first of all, you know, it's always a pleasure to chat to you. I really appreciate you having me on. The Demographica Network, demographicauk.com, at DGN official _ on all socials. You know, you can find all of the content that we produce there, and please get involved. You know, if you're interested in writing stories, if you're a young person especially that's interested in getting involved in journalism or in discussions about politics and social issues, and you don't feel like you've had a place to be able to do that, that's where we come in. That's the opportunity that we provide, so please engage. And yeah, I would say, you know, like, try and stay hopeful about the situation that we're in. We talked about a lot of stuff that's maybe a bit
we did,
you know, bit dire, the situation that we're in, but, you know, stay positive, and conversations like this always reaffirm my hope.
100%, man. And you know, we talk about you know, let's call them tough issues, dire issues, whatever, to raise awareness of the fact that they exist, but not only that, but the awareness that they can be overcome. And
Sure.
That's the positivity that everybody needs to maintain. And with that, we will overcome some of these more, you know, these perils that we're kind of putting out there. But I thank you, Jack. I appreciate you. It's always good talking to you. You know, and I don't want to put a number on it like it means something, but for somebody who's 23, you know, you're doing amazing stuff, pal. And it's great to be connected with you. It's great to support you in any way we can. And yeah, just keep doing what you're doing, man, because
thank you.
You're one of the good ones. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Inevitably, we'll do this again. So
absolutely.
You know, until the next time, take care of yourself, and my best to everybody in your organization and that you're working with, man, because you guys are doing great work, and may it continue for a long time.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. All the best.
Speak soon.